before the presentation. So good afternoon for Bangkok time. We have the third session of the webinar series, and this time we are very fortunate to have Vivienne with us, because she's one of the forefront of those who adopted interest in the sea nomads in our region. So our webinar today will start with Vivienne Wee, and after that we will have Ajahn Pit. Let me have a look. Ajahn Pittayawat. Okay. Pittayawat. And then we also have Maxime and Lunn. Correct? Okay, so there will be 4 speakers, and we start with Vivienne. So Vivienne, could you have the floor, please? Welcome. If you can remember me, I met you in Chai long time ago.
Yes. When did we meet? What under what circumstances?
I think that it was at IDRC or somewhere.
Oh yeah, IDRC. Yeah.
But you are not changed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so please, Vivienne.
Yeah. Thank you. So today, my presentation is going to raise a number of questions. My title is a question which I try to answer with more questions. So the questions that I pose are, how far back should we go? And then I ask, how do people adapt to land, shore, sea, and monsoons? Why were the Orang Laut integrated into the traditional state? And then finally, who are the Orang Laut? So let's start with the first question. How far back should we go? Well, the sea people live on the sea. So we have to look at how sea levels have changed through time. 17,000 years ago, the sea level was 120 meters below what it is at present. So at that time, 17,000 years ago, Singapore, the Malay Peninsula, all the islands of the Riau Lingga archipelago, Sumatra, Borneo, Palawan, Java, Bali, they were all connected, and they all sat on the same continental shelf, which is the Sunda Shelf. And this is the world's second largest continental shelf. So you can see that these are all the connected parts. So you could actually walk where the land was exposed. So it was one interconnected plain, and scholars have named it as Sundaland. So at that time, we did not have peninsular or insular Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia didn't look like the way it looks now on the map. So 11,000 years ago, the sea level rose. So the sea level was 50 meters above the present. But you can see that even at that time, the lower lying parts may have been covered by the sea, but there were still interconnections. There were still land bridges connecting the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo. And Singapore was not an island at that time. And definitely there was no Riau Lingga archipelago. So it was only 7,000 years ago that we started getting the shape of Southeast Asia that we see in the maps now. And at that time, the sea level was about 10 meters below the present. And this in this map, you can see that Singapore had emerged as an island, and all the islands of the Riau Lingga archipelago as well. So this is the time that, we start asking what happened to the people who used to live on Sunda land. So now this part that has been submerged, the submerged parts, now we call it Java Sea. But you will find that it's very shallow because it's only 40 meters deep. So that's very shallow compared to the part that is between Bali and Lombok, which is 250 meters deep. Now, why are we concerned about the rise in sea level? Because it had a direct impact on the mode of subsistence and boats. Now, if we talk about the sea people, obviously we have to talk about boats. So there is very little archaeological evidence about boats. And boats became more important when you had more coast, more sea, and less land, because you need to move on rivers and seas. So, in fact, the rising sea doubled the coastline compared with the previous coastline of Sundaland. And when the sea was low and the Sunda shelf was a connected plain, the vessels that were needed were mostly for just traveling on rivers rather than on the sea. So, in fact, marine archaeologists use the term watercraft for vessels in prehistoric times rather than boats and ships, because at that time, 17,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, and even at the start of 7,000 years ago, there were no boats and ships. So these are three of the earliest vessels that exist in Southeast Asia, and they still exist now. First is the raft. And here in this picture, you see that the raft has been constructed out of bamboo tubes that have been strung together. And this is still done. People still use these kinds of rafts. And then you have the coracle, which is basically a woven basket, but a basket that is big enough for a human being. And then you have the dugout canoe. Okay. Now, the raft and the coracle are more suitable for travel on rivers, not the open sea. But the dugout canoe was the one that became the basis of subsequent boats and ships. So this is why dugout canoes are found throughout the world. Now, this doesn't mean that there are orang laut throughout the world, okay? But there are dugout canoes all over the world: Asia, Africa, Americas. Nowadays, you find that there are three clusters of maritime foraging in Southeast Asia: the Moken, the orang laut in the Riau Lingga archipelago, and the Sama Bajau or the Bajau Laut further east. Okay, so we tend to regard them as minorities that are pursuing a kind of very marginal mode of subsistence. But in fact, foraging is what all species do to sustain life. And the human species also practice foraging to sustain themselves for hundreds of thousands of years until farming was invented 10,000 years ago. Now, 10,000 years ago is not that long ago. And 10,000 years ago, compared with 7,000 years, it's just like, it's quite near, right? 10,000 years farming, and then 7,000 years the sea rose and created peninsular and insular Southeast Asia. And not only that, when we look at the beginning of farming, it only occurred in 5 parts of the world: Tigris, Euphrates rivers, the Nile River, the Indus River, the Yellow River, and Mesoamerica. Now, we have no idea whether there was any farming on Sundaland when it was a connected plain. But it seems to be the case that plant domestication was introduced to Southeast Asia from New Guinea and from the coastal regions of southern China after the sea rose. So we didn't have farming at all. Okay, we tend to think of farming as that's the majority mode of production, but that's not true. It has been proposed that, because we cannot find archaeological evidence for it, that typical pre-Neolithic subsistence modes in the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra were mostly nomadic foraging, semi-sedentary gathering, and semi-sedentary vegetative horticulture. So this means that foraging was not strange. Foraging was not a kind of an unknown way of life, and then suddenly the orang laut had to learn how to forage. Foraging was the previous way of life on Sundaland. So what changed was that the range of resources changed. The range of resources when the sea rose changed. So we can look at what some of these are. So we see that the orang laut and their ancestors foraged from an integrated resource zone, which included land, rivers, shore, and sea. Now, it's wrong to think that the orang laut did not use resources and just lived on boats non-stop, 24 hours a day, every day of the week. No, it's not true. First of all, they need to build boats. And you need to get wood from trees. So you need to know which trees are suitable. Secondly, they need fresh water. They cannot store enough fresh water on their boats to use day in and day out without replenishment. They need to know where these sources of fresh water are. Third, they need to moor their boats and they need to repair their boats. They need to take shelter from storms. And lastly, they need to bury their dead. I mean, they do not just toss, the bodies of the dead into the sea. They don't do that. They bury the dead on land. And up to now, they hunt on land. And they guide people who want to hunt deer, wild boar, and other animals. And they also obtain tubers and forest products. From rivers, they get water as well. And then they also obtain freshwater fish and shrimps. Now, you find that from the shore, strand, and mangrove swamps, they get wood, shellfish, crab, jellyfish, and then there is a very important item, sea cucumber. These are echinoderms which have been traded with the southern Chinese since the 17th century, and there are historical documents about that. This sea cucumber trade is now worth US $60 million. And from the sea, they obtain all kinds of fishes, especially coral fishes, anchovy, whitebait, prawn, squid, octopus, as well as marine mammals such as dugongs. So what changed from foraging on Sunda land when it was a connected plain, exposed by the low sea level, to foraging on land, rivers, shore, and sea is that a wider range of resources were obtained from the shore and the sea, because there was more sea, more coastline. Okay, another thing that is very important to note when people move into a kind of a sea-oriented way of life are the monsoon winds. Okay, or the orang laut prefer small islands. So when they have a village and they build houses, they prefer small islands. They don't like big islands. They're not land based, and in fact, if it makes sense, right? If you're on the big island, and you don't have all these infrastructure like asphalt roads and cars and all that, it's very difficult to travel on big islands, and especially if you are on boats. Okay, now you have the monsoon. These are monsoon winds. So the southwest monsoon blows from May to November. These are shown by the black arrows. And now in addition, there is the southeast monsoon from Australia, which blow also from April to November. So southwest, these are the southern winds. And then the northeast monsoon blows from East Asia, especially China and Mongolia. And that's in December to February. So every year, this is annual, every year the winds move around like that. So people who are sea-oriented and live on boats, they prefer small islands. This is quite important. This is an important point because small islands tend to be ignored. There's a Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, who talks about the usefulness of the useless. So, the orang laut may have been able to survive because they're on small islands that people don't pay great deal of attention. There's no oil, there's no mineral, there's no, all the resources that are needed by the industrial world. And they prefer small islands because it's easy for boats to move in any direction, and they can take advantage of the winds that are blowing all the time. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no orang laut on bigger islands. Okay, there are some orang laut who forage off larger islands. So I want to give an example in Singapore. Now in Singapore, we have the orang seleta, and the forage around here. This is Seletar River on the north, just where the arrow is pointing. And then you can maybe see this white line. That's because the Singapore government has dammed up this river, so they cannot go through this river anymore. And then you have the orang slat in the south, and they live on all these small islands in the south. Now the orang laut and the orang laut in Singapore are divided into the orang seleta and the orang slat, and they don't mingle, they don't eat together, they don't live together, they don't marry each other, so they are separated. They have social differentiation. Okay, so the orang laut located in the south of Singapore are also called the orang slat, because this is the Singapore Strait that divides Indonesia and Singapore as nation states. So you can see this is Batam here, and in the south at the corner of the map, and then you have Singapore. So see, the orang slat are orientated towards the Riau Lingga Islands, which are now in Indonesia, as part of their resource zone. And the orang seleta are orientated towards the north, because as you can see, all here is Malaysia, or what is now Malaysia. That's especially Johor. That's part of their resource zone. So they have different resource zones. They have different areas which constitute the place where they obtain their livelihood resources. Now I show you some photographs. Because one good thing about living in Singapore is that there is the National Archives, and they keep some pictures. So the orang seleta were adapted to rivers. So here are the orang seleta living on rafts. As you can see here, some rafts which are strung together on bamboos, and they live on the Seletar River before it became Seletar Reservoir. So these are rafts in the 19th century. Now, up to 1950s, these photos were taken in the 1950s. The orang seleta, as I said, they considered Johor as part of their resource zone. They lived on boats in Johor. And you can see in this boat, in this picture on the top left-hand corner, you can see there are some water jugs. This is the amount of water that can be kept, on the boat for their use. It's not very much. So they need to go to land to replenish their water supply. And basically, they are living in two kampungs, Kampung Bakar Batu and Kampung Sungai Temon, and they are still there. So up to, as far as we know from the documentary evidence, we have the orang seleta living on boats in the 1950s. Now, in 2021, they are living in houses in still these particular areas. And here are some more photographs. Now, the orang slat, who are adapted to the sea. So, at the left-hand side, you have the orang slat houses off the south coast of Singapore. This is actually near Sentosa. So if you've been to Singapore and you say, oh, Sentosa, all these it's an amusement park with all these Universal Studio and all that. But in fact, it was the site of orang slat settlement. Now, I want to point out to you that between the houses, there are no connecting walkways. Now, this is a feature of orang laut houses, that there are no connecting walkways. So if you want to visit somebody else in another house, you actually have to get on a boat to go there. And it's quite typical. Why do they want to have connecting walkways? And this is a much more recent photograph. Here is an orang laut on the right-hand side from the Batam area visiting the southern islands of Singapore. So if the orang slat in Singapore look at the islands in the Riau Lingga archipelago as part of their resource zone, vice versa, the people in the Riau Lingga archipelago also look at Singapore as part of their resource zone. So what this shows, I hope that this shows, is that it is very important to have local knowledge. And they need specific local knowledge. This tree, this rock, this current, this wind, these waters. They need to know. They cannot search around and, oh, where's fresh water? They must know that there are streams, there's spring, and then so that they can get. This is not the way of knowing is different. It's not generalized, homogenized, standardized knowledge like we have in industrialized society. So what we have is not just the knowledge, but also the ways of knowing. So this local knowledge is very important. Okay, because each local group uses a specific combination of resources for their livelihood. So when we look at the kind of kinship network that links the Orang Lawat families, it's also a network of local knowledge of familiar places. Now I want to give an example. This is an example of an Orang Lawat settlement in Panglong. Now you can compare these houses with the houses that we just saw in the 1900s postcard, the Orang Salat of Singapore. Maybe I go back. Yeah, see, this is from a 1900s postcard in Singapore. Now you look at Panglong off the northeast coast of Bintan Island. They are living in houses built by the Indonesian government. So you can see that the houses are made of cement. Okay, these Orang Laut in Panglong are seasonally visited by their relatives from southeast of Batam Island during the southwest monsoon. That means they take advantage of the southern winds to visit, and the southern southwest monsoon blow them from Batam to Bintan, the northeast coast. So both these groups, the Orang Laut in Panglong and the visitors from Batam, they have local knowledge of this area, the northeast coast as a resource zone. But these people who live in Panglong, they are more sedentarized. They don't travel in boats anymore. They live in cement houses. So they have little knowledge of the Batam area. Okay? This shows that when mobility is reduced, the scope of local knowledge is also reduced. Okay, now I want to move to an important topic, which is about nomadism and sedentarism. Now, sometimes people think that nomads are just moving around in a random manner, but actually, as Cynthia Chow said, it's not random. It's actually a guided movement. Is guided by their own navigational routes concerning interrelated territories which are based on kinship ties and related resource sites. Okay, they don't like the people from Batam, the wind blows them to this particular place where they have relatives. They don't go just any old where. But nomadism has a bad name because the Indonesian government, for example, is very prejudiced against nomadic people. They think the nomadic people are backward. So there is a policy to settle nomadic populations, to make them sedentary. And there's a name for this policy. It's called permukiman. Mukim is a kind of a settlement, and permukiman, make a settlement. Okay. Now I'll give you an example. There's Air Kalubi, which you can see in the map at the bottom. This is off the southern coast of Bintan. So in 1992, the Department of Social Affairs in the Indonesian government built houses for 40 Orang Laut families. Now, those Orang Laut who agreed to live in the houses were converted to Islam. But one of them said, we were pushed to settle and convert to Islam. So they were not so happy about being settled and converted. And they had houses 30 meters by 50 meters with 1/4 hectare of open land. But they didn't have title deeds. They didn't get any title deeds. The government also built a mosque for them. But what has happened is that this settlement is flexibly settled. So for some periods of the year, many houses are unoccupied. That's because people have gone to sea. And other periods, most of the houses are occupied. And so sometimes it's very tricky to visit them because you don't know whether this is their on season or their off season. But it shows that the Orang Laut have incorporated the government built houses as part of their resource zone. And far from being settled, what they have done is that they have incorporated it into their mobility and settle rotation, so that they're not settled people. They still carry out their movements, but or and they settle when take shelter from the storm, for example, when as and when they please. Well, and one thing good about being an Orang Laut is everybody is so scared of you because they're afraid of black magic and so on. So they don't come in. And so you don't have migrants from other areas coming in to settle. So they are free to use it as they please. Now I want to move to this topic. Why did some Orang Laut become sedentary? Now the move towards sedentarism was a historical process. It happened, over centuries. Now, and what's associated with it? So we have to examine this historical process whereby sedentarism evolved. Now, the thing that I find that is most relevant is that in the 19th and 20th centuries, we have state-sponsored piracy. I mean, you still have piracy, but we don't have traditional state sponsoring piracy now. But in the 19th and 20th century, there was state sponsored piracy. Now the key features of the piratical raids were that there were larger boats. Now this is why it was important to put in this adjective, state sponsored piracy. It wasn't just any old raiding. It was you needed capital, you needed mobilization, you needed a certain kind of system of organizing human resources. So they had larger boats, and they had crews of 13 to 24 men, more than families in Orang Laut boats. And now this is quite important, there were no accompanying women or children. So the women stayed on the islands, and this is where you started getting different motivation for staying, not just taking shelter from the storm, but staying on islands and settling down and foraging to look after themselves and their families. So the women did that, while the men went out raiding, and they went quite far. There were raids in the Straits of Malacca, Java Sea, elsewhere. They raided ships, and then they sold their booty to Chinese traders. Now, all this is very well documented because the European colonizers were very concerned about piracy. Now, piracy of this kind, state-sponsored piracy, meant integration into the traditional state. And here we have to look at the participation of the Orang Laut in the traditional state. And these states are also very well documented. The first traditional state was Srivijaya, founded possibly in 683 AD. Now, this date is based on this stone, which is the Kedukan Bukit. It is now in the National Museum in Jakarta. It was found in Palembang, which is where the Srivijaya was supposed to be. And there's an inscription of the first king of Srivijaya, Dapunta Hiam. And the name of the country Srivijaya is in this inscription. I actually did a little PowerPoint of the inscription on these two stones that you can study. So the second one is also quite interesting. This is Telaga Batu from South Lampung. Both of these places, Palembang and South Lampung, are on Sumatra. And it's a social contract between ruler and subjects, and we assume that the subjects include Orang Laut, cursing all who plot against the king and kingdom, and blessing those who submit to the rule of Srivijaya. These stones, these inscriptions, represent the earliest writing, which is Sanskritic writing, of Old Malay. The state that followed was at Temasek, Singapore. from 1300s to 1400. So we have, and it was located at Fort Canning, if you know where that is. And then this kingdom was destroyed by the Javanese, and then Malacca was the next kingdom that was set up. Now, what is interesting is that the king of Temasek, according to the Malay histories, escaped via the north of Singapore with the help of the Orang Selatan. So the indigenous texts recognize the role of the Orang Selatan in helping the king to escape. Now, it was in Malacca that conversion to Islam took place. It was around 1500. So it wasn't that, so actually we had two kingdoms that were the traditional state that were not Muslim. And in 1511, Malacca was conquered by the Portuguese. After that, Malacca was succeeded by the Johor kingdom, which included Johor, Pahang, Riau, and Lingga. Now, this successor kingdom lasted from 1511 until 1911, when the last king abdicated and left for Singapore. He died in Singapore and he's buried here. Okay. Now, why was some Orang Laut integrated into the traditional state? Now, there's this term that is used in the 19th century, Orang Persukuan, people divided into suku, and they were also called rakyat subjects. Now, as Orang Persukuan and rakyat, they were assigned rank duties by their rulers. So these rank duties include things like singing the ruler to sleep, or carrying the beetle tray, or looking after the dogs for hunting. I mean, and they were ranked. So there were ranked duties. Some there were duties that were inside the palace, there were duties outside the palace. So of course, inside the palace is a higher rank than outside the palace, and so on. Now, why did the traditional state integrate these Orang Laut? It's because it was essential. Now, if you look at the trade goods that were offered by these traditional rulers to other states, especially China, now you look at these things: elephant's tusks, rhinoceros horns, pearls and other shells, medicinal herbs, spices, gold, forest products, tin, tortoise shell from Pulau Tujuh, and then pearls, corals, and coral tree and corals. So I show you here, which is in the National Museum in Singapore, the coral tree, pearls, and then there is the coral brooch. Now, who assembled such trade goods? They were nomadic populations, of the sea and the forest. And I've put down the documentary source for this. So obviously, this is not a state founded on farming. Okay, so what we have is that the Orang Laut, who were integrated into a traditional state, provided extractive labor. I mean, you extract, right? You extract the pearls, you extract the corals. These are natural resources, and it's based on local knowledge of natural resources. Okay, so in other words, this is also a commentary on the type of state that we had from Srivijaya until the Johor Kingdom. Now, I'd like to provide an example here. And this is an example from Karas, which is the home of the Suku Galang. This is one of my field research sites. Now, you find the people of Karas completely sedentary. That means 100% they live in the houses on Karas. They don't live on boats, okay? They were pirates, and it's very well documented. It's very well documented that there were Galang pirates in the 19th and 20th centuries. And up to this day, the people who call themselves Melayu Murni, the pure Malays, the aristocrats, those who are aligned with the ruling elite, they are so afraid of these Karas people. They dare not eat with them. They eat on their boats because they are afraid of being poisoned. Now, I interviewed all pirates and descendants of pirates, and they were very proud of piratical exploits. They raided the ships, and they captured victims, and they had them fight duels and all kinds of piratical exploits. They thought that I had magical power because I was afraid. And then quite recently in January last year, a woman came and asked me, why am I not afraid? I said, well, I want to know the truth, right? So she was very impressed by that. So now these pirates were Islamized by an Arab from Singapore. And the years are probably 1942 or 1970. And they gave quite good accounts of how they were Islamized. But the older respondents also remember pre-Islamic rituals, like, looking after the village in a ritual called Bela Kampung. Now, after being Islamized by this Arab from Singapore, Said Osman, the Karas Muslims converted the Orang Laut of Nanga. So I show Karas here, is this island on the side. And then here's Nanga, which is the small islands, not a big one, the small ones, okay? Okay, they converted these Orang Laut to Nanga probably in the 1970s. And Cynthia Chow wrote about the conversion incident. But the Karas people don't eat together or have intermarriage between Karas and Nanga. So there is a hierarchy. The hierarchy is that the Karas people regard themselves as more Islamized and therefore superior to the less Islamized people of Nanga. Now, the Karas people don't identify themselves as Orang Laut. They call themselves Suku Galang. Okay, now we come to a very important part. Who were the Orang Laut not integrated into the traditional state? Now, there are small local populations, and they were not assigned rank duties. They were not recruited to join piratical raids. So the traditional rulers did some kind of talent scouting. They looked for recruits that could fit roles in the state structure, in the traditional state structure. So the foragers just provided for themselves every day. And possibly their descendants are the 3,000 to 5,000 Orang Laut that we have in Riau Lingga at the present. This is why my talk is called Who Are the Orang Laut, you see, because we have to look at this historical background. Now, actually, in terms of numbers, more are descendants of the Orang Laut previously integrated into the traditional state structure. Right? And in Karas alone, there are more than 2,000 descendants of those kinds of Orang Laut who were in the traditional state structure. Now, why were they integrated? And there are some pros and cons. There are some benefits and disadvantages of integration versus non-integration. And this brings us to the topic of prestige goods. Okay. So here I want to refer to Jeffrey's analysis of 2002, where he talked about tribality in the Malay world. So on top, there are rulers who place themselves in command. The ones who are the kings and the officials of the court. And then in the middle are the ruler subjects who are controlled by the state, and they provide, resources and goods for the state in exchange for a little reflected glory. The reflected glory can be represented by these prestige goods. Like, oh, I got this medal and I got this title and I got this shell and I got this plate, that sort of thing. But no counter control. Now, this issue of counter control, there are attempts at counter control. For example, counter control through black magic, or counter control through instigation of fear, like the Karas people trying to frighten the pure Malays. So there are some attempts, and it's kind of complicated, which I will explain in the book that I'm writing. But on the whole, they are beholden to some ruling elite. Sometimes the ruling elites are fighting among themselves, so they may side with one ruling elite rather than another. But they are beholden. They are controlled by some form of the state. Okay, so these people who are in this position, number 2, in category 2, they are peasants or peasantized tribals. That means they are tribals, they are Orang Laut, but they got integrated into the traditional state. Now, at the bottom are those who hold themselves aloof from the state and who retain their autonomy. Now, these are the people we call tribals, but they too are feared for their black magic. But they don't try to control the ruling elite, they just leave them alone. Okay. Now, here I want to pose this question. Aloof tribals, left out by the traditional state, or both? Now, Antonio Gramsci, differentiated between two types of power relations: coercion versus consent. Coercion is when the state structure controls subjects through coercion, and so they govern through punishment and fear of punishment. Okay? But consent is where the subjects consent to state control without being coerced. So they are just being governed because they have consented to be governed. So on the one hand, you have tribal Malays, the tribal Orang Laut, who may have withheld consent, choosing not to be integrated into the traditional state. But on the other hand, let's not forget that the rulers of the traditional state picked and chose. They chose who could join their piratical raids, which group were suitable for them. So this is why some didn't get chosen. Okay, so this may explain why some groups of Orang Laut practice a kind of one-upmanship, like by referring to themselves as suku, belonging to a traditional state structure, implying that they were chosen. Okay. Now, coercion is out of the question because, as noted by Gallic and others, the traditional states of the Malay world were too porous for coercion or punishment to be imposed. People just simply ran away. Now, you want to coerce me? I run away. Okay. Now, in the Riau Lingga Islands, this is still the case. The porosity, that means the porous kind of situation, derives from having 1,796 islands all surrounded by the sea. Now, this kind of porosity is also true of the 18,307 islands of Indonesia, surrounded by more than 3 million square kilometers of sea. So, in other words, it's the sea. The sea makes state structures porous. So it implies that you need a certain kind of topography to have a certain kind of traditional state structure. So now the traditional state of Johor, Pahang, Riau, and Lingga is no longer in existence. No institutional reality. So despite all this kind of cultural discourses, it doesn't exist institutionally. But is the nation state of the Republic of Indonesia a successor in any way? So we have tribals interacting with nation states. Or we have monarchies. Now, there is a historical relationship between traditional rulers of Brunei and Orang Laut who were subjects, but the current situation is unknown. Now, in Thailand, there is no historical relationship between the current monarchy and Orang Laut as subjects. And the current situation is unknown. Now, we have ethnic states. And ethnic states are those states where the population is divided into ethnic groups which are supposed to remain separated and different forever. Okay, so in Malaysia, you have Malays, Chinese, and others, Indian and others, and the tribal Seletar who are now there in Johor, they identify themselves as Orang Asli, not as Malay, because if they were Malays, if they were categorized as Malays, they would have to be Muslims. And they don't want to be Muslims. Now, in Singapore, we also have the same ethnic category, Chinese, Malay, Indian, other, but there's no room for tribals. So the Orang Selat who are still here, who are still in Singapore, they just lump as Malays. Now, in Indonesia, you have a non-ethnic state of supposedly equal citizens. Now, there are some there's some differences in the array of benefits and disadvantages to different groups of Orang Laut. So where the current people are concerned, they have equality with other Indonesians, especially the Melayu Murni, and especially the aristocrats who are not recognized as superior in Indonesia. Now, in Malaysia, they are recognized as superior. In Indonesia, they are not. They are not. So the Karas people can be an Indonesian citizen equal with other situations. But for other orang laut, they are stigmatized as uncivilized because they are tribal. And but I have noticed over the years, and I have been doing research in this area, in the Riau Lingga archipelago and in Singapore, for 40 years or more than 40 years, since 1979. I have noticed that there is a growing Orang Laut pride. People are not ashamed of being Orang Laut. So is there a possibility of being Orang Laut an Indonesian citizen? But let's not forget that the nation state of the Republic of Indonesia is still a centralized polity, and it still demands attention and obedience from citizens. So I end with this photograph, and I think it depicts what the Orang Laut who are tribal want. They want autonomy and equality. They do not want to give up their autonomy at any price, and they do not want to be stigmatized as inferior because they want to be autonomous. So this photograph shows an Orang Laut at this at Sungai Kawal, which is in Bintan, on the east coast of Bintan. She is not a domesticated woman, and she's not immobilized by gender stereotyping. She built her family house with family members, and you can see this as a self-built house because note there are no connecting walkways. It's made of wood. It's not made of cement, and if that's the price for autonomy, well, that's what they have. Okay, that's the end of my talk, Supang.
Thank you very much, Vivienne.
Yes, very good.
Very lively and interesting information and analysis. I have some questions, but I would like to invite other participants. If you have questions to Vivienne, Jack, do you have any?
I have thousands, so I will only pick a few ones.
Yes,
do you have any number of the population of the Selatar and Selat, all of them? How many percent that will be?
Sorry, the number of what?
Of the people, the Selatar and Selat.
Oh, the Seletar and Selat. The Seletar would be Jeffrey, do you know how the numbers are?
More or less. It go to 100,000.
You've muted, Jeffrey. You're muted.
I don't have the numbers offhand. I think it's possibly maybe approaching 1,000 to 2,000, but the numbers are available from Malaysian sources.
Yeah, okay, it's always the same number. It's always 2,000 to 4. Okay.
Yeah, but you see, Jack, because the Orang Seletar have moved from Singapore, there's no room for tribals in the modern Singapore, the high-rise buildings and all that.
Yes.
So they have moved to Johor, and they moved to Johor because they have this relationship with the Johor ruling house. And so they are Orang Asli. They are Orang Asli in Malaysia. But you know, when we ask about the Orang Selat in Singapore, it's much more difficult because they've been lumped as Malays. So
yes, I know
Malays, Malays, everybody's Malay, so everybody's a Malay.
That's the problem with the state when they start to try and integrate the population. They're all Malay, they're all Thai. In Burma, they always separate because everybody has each nationality. So they have sometimes binational, sometimes they have free nationality. It's impossible, in fact, to give any, let's say, a real structure in the nationality, even if they have ID paper. This is my second question. The segmentation, I will say, of this population of Orang Laut in Rio, apparently because of the geographical situation, they have to split more or less to get resources. So they split, and do they understand each other without any problem? let's say up to Johor, to Seletar, if they speak together, they will understand each other.
No. They have separate languages. They have separate languages. But this whole situation about language is also complicated by. It's a long story, okay, but
yes, anyway, I know.
Because I'm writing a book about this. You see, I was told on Penyengat that the orang Lawa speak in a certain way, and I have a list of words, out for yes, not yeah, out. And then I went to Daik, and I found that the royal family there speak with the same language, and then so yeah, that's right. So therefore, the languages that we have now in Malaysia and Indonesia is based on this created by the Bugis. The orang Lawa speak their own languages. Jim Collins has written about that, right, Jeffrey?
Yeah. But
yes,
yeah, I know. Is there occasional meeting between them for any kind of reason?
You see, they stick to particular sites. Like for instance, this woman in Kawal, which you can still see on the screen, she's related to the group in Panglong. So they acknowledge it, but they don't interact with other groups. So therefore, the Orang Lao groups, which is something that I talked about with Cynthia about how are we going to do this, because there's a network for sharing, but network for sharing also means network for not sharing. And there's also a network of not sharing. There are also people who are not in this in certain network.
There is the situation is in fact, if you make abstraction of the geographical surrounding, the situation is the same with the Moken, Raklawoy, who have interaction, but who are not the same, but within they are the same, they can speak together, but they say they are not the same, etc., etc. In fact, they always find a way to be together. If they don't need to be together, they will not be. If they need to be attached to a special nation, they will say, yes, we are Thai, we are Malay, we are Burmese, whatever the people wanted. But in fact, the connection, there is a lot of connection and a no connection link as well. I mean, the no connection is a connection also. And to me, all this connection and not connection they claim is in fact a relationship between the island and the littoral. You don't have that in Singapore because it's all very stick together, island, the river, and so on. But in Mergui Archipelago, it's very wider. So you can make differences more easily. But you need people on the land, on the littoral, to work with people on the island.
They don't need. Sorry, John. They don't need to work together.
No, they don't need to work, but they need to have let's say, for instance, for the Moken, it's good to have somebody, for instance, up to Longta, that means few hundred kilometers down south, they know each other and they intermarried. So in case of problem, in case of military attack, formerly it was piracy, of course, in case of any problem, they can go back on land and then go forward to the island. But if you ask to a real Moken, he will tell you that he's a people of the island, not of the sea. And there is connection between the littoral and everywhere. What I want to say is what is very interesting, but it has to be more, this is where I am a little weak and I need you. It's the time framework. Now, first question, another one. The difference between the sea and the river. Apparently, the people you mentioned take the resources in the river as well.
Yes, they take but it depends on whether their main adaptation is to the rivers or to the sea. So the Orang Seletar are adapted to the rivers, but the Orang Selat are more adapted to the sea. But the Orang Seletar are afraid of the Orang Selat because the Orang Selat engage in piracy.
So this is a way to divide and to protect themselves for their resources by the so-called afraid of black magic.
they are so far. They're so far apart. So they may recognize themselves as somewhat related, but they are also dissociated. They also dissociated. They also keep themselves apart. So
Okay.
the Orang Seletar, and this is where the Chinese come in, because the Chinese come in at the point where groups need to work together and they cannot get along, and then the Chinese come in and actually become the real middlemen. So
Yes.
so the Chinese have always played this historical role.
Yes, yes, and we have the same. This is why I will. My last question that I will stop, and then we will discuss after when we discuss about the book or something. It's a time frame where, when you say the Chinese arrive around for the sea slug and all other things to collect by the Orang Lao to be sold by middlemen Chinese around the 17th century. In fact,
No, earlier than that. It's just that it was a record. There is a record.
Yeah, the record. We agree. We don't have any record.
No, there are some records. There are some records.
We discovered that what we thought was a very old way of doing things, the exchanges, produce of the sea, and for the Semang or the other nomad in the forest, exchange product of the forest and so on. In fact, when you ask the Moken and the Chinese, because there is a lot of mixed Chinese and Moken, because the Toke, they married Moken, we find out that the diver, Moken diving for sea slug are not so long ago. It's maybe 3-4 generation. And before that, we don't know exactly what were they doing. Maybe they were not on that boat, and there is a lack of information, which is very difficult to give any point, because we don't have any data, any resource. So we have to rely on the tin mining, because we have a little, but it's very few archaeological data who can help us to put any date. What I agree, and when you talk is after Johor and leave them, I think they kind of release some people, and these people go up north. That's what I think. But
wait. This is exactly
a thought.
This is something that I've actually worked on. So actually, when we say the Chinese, we have to put the Chinese in inverted commas, because who are the Chinese, right? So we actually have a problem understanding who the Chinese are, and so we cannot just lump them as they are together. So there are specific groups. So we have this text. We have this text is I'm trying to look for it now. I think it's dated about. I just don't know whether I have it or not. Wait. Yeah, there's a Chinese text dating from the 13th century, who reported that the Chinese were already in the area. Okay.
Yes.
But this document is written by a Chinese trader from one specific part of China, and he was afraid of other Chinese who were with the pirates by the way, in the southern islands, and he was afraid of being raided by them. Okay, so when we say Chinese, there are Chinese and Chinese. Okay, so the people who are working with the Orang Laut, for example, to get a sea cucumber and then trading them, these kind of Chinese are the Teochews who are in Guangzhou province in South China. And then they scam the other Chinese population by saying that this is very good for your health and so on. And they're the ones who taught the Orang Laut to get the sea cucumber. So we can't say that the Chinese are one. No.
I don't say that. I said the only thing is we know from mixed blood Chinese and Moken that the Google, for instance, to dive arrived by some Chinese. There is any story, so we can date some around the 8th of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, that they start to dive. I don't know, maybe they dive before, because they have even wooden Google Who knows?
Yeah, and
But
also
what for sure is for
yeah.
once we have a real data saying that the Google were arriving for the sea slug by a Chinese and the family is still there and they can trace back their genealogy. So that's the only trace we have. But we have other way to do that by tin mining, because tin mining was there for century, and the Moken are always around big. If you have tin mining, you will find Moken. You will find Moken everywhere where there is money to collect around a big center of economical center. But I will leave you another thing is, when you say that small islands are preferred for the thing, I do agree. It's their liberty, but their liberty at a cost. This is why the role of the middleman is very important. They have to be protected, and protected by the piracy. And the piracy is very important because in the collective mind, even in the Moken, they're still very strong. That means when we make this map of the social space, we are making it, there is a lot of place which are still now, the Moken will not go because they were the camps of the pirates. And they are very afraid. And sometimes, you can see a woman just flee in the forest because they see boats coming. So the fear of this piracy is very strong. Meaning that, yes, they have to be, it's an equilibrium between being protected by a middleman who can insert you in a certain economy and then give you a place, and the piracy will not attack you. It's a kind of a system which has to be like this. So,
I don't know whether the Chinese
piracy for me is a strong means of spreading. That means if this nomad group spread around all this archipelago, which is 600 kilometers, is because it's a protection also. Mobility is a protection.
But I want to point out to you that the Chinese were not concerned about protecting anybody.
No, I know that, but I was thinking.
But there were Chinese traders living with pirates. There were Chinese traders in the pirates' camp, and you see, piracy is a kind of economic activity that enables you to get goods for free, okay? And then you can sell it very cheaply to these Chinese traders and merchants who are living in your camp. So in Karas, there were Chinese traders and merchants.
And with the Moken, you have Chinese living with the Moken as well. You have both in both camps. So the idea is to make stronger, let's say, your Chinese, the stronger as possible, so you will find the resources of the island. Voilà. This is,
I don't know whether they were very concerned about that, because actually these Chinese are quite tough customers to deal with. So it's not they certainly don't act in a collective way.
No, that's for sure. I do agree. Okay, that was very interesting. I have a lot of questions about the time framework and so on, but I will ask you after, because it's a little bit complicated. And about the agriculture coming with plants, I do agree with you, a lot of things. And 17th century, all the date you gave fits as well with my time framework for all this migration and why they divided with and so on and so on. So I will explain you in what relation I can, my idea of what you said and what I think, how it can be linked with our own Orang Laut. In fact, thank you very much for what you say. For me, it was very enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, I made a presentation of the two inscriptions in case you are curious, because they are among the oldest. They are among the oldest inscriptions that we have of Old Malay. So you can see that it's recognizably Malay.
Yes.
It's recognizably Malay, and then this is a translation by Sedes. So the name Sri Vijaya is there, and then
and so in this inscription of the seventh century, it's the Telaga Batu. Is there the name you named the Orang Laut there?
I said including Orang Laut because
but they have a name in the inscription.
They were just in terms of their roles. So the roles were more important, like they were workmen, surveyors, cutlers, clerks, and so on, but not orang laut. They were servants and slaves.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
No, yeah.
You asked how many orang Slater there are. The number is around 1,800 currently, 1,800, and they live in 6 villages on the South Johor coast. The Singapore settlement, as Vivienne said, has disappeared. So some of them went to Malaysia and some have got absorbed more broadly into the Singapore population. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I will stop there because if you don't stop me, I will be there in an hour.
Thank you, everyone. I hate to do this, but I think we should move on to some room for the other presentations.
No, I don't think so. We can still.
I suggest we move to Kozolong presentation. It's another topic which is somehow much a specialized topic on how now Moken communities in the Miek archipelago in Myanmar or can be involved in marine protected areas and the development of marine protected areas in Myanmar. So Kozolong, I leave you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please.
Maxime, je t'entends mal.
Sorry, please wait. I'm opening my PowerPoint. There's something wrong with my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Not yet.
Not yet?
See your screen.
We can see your computer with the file manager, the file explorer, but not your PowerPoint.
Okay, please. How about now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad to meet with you. I'm very happy to be here to share about Myanmar Mokens in this webinar. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me to share about Myanmar Mokens, and also Mr. Maxime. Thank you for your invited me to share about Myanmar Mokens. I'm Zolan from FFI Myanmar program, is a marine and freshwater program manager. So, to the topic of my presentation, that is strengthen the collaborative management of marine living resources for future of the Moken in Myanmar. Actually, in Myanmar, do you know that Moken we call Moken and also Salo? So I'm going to use Moken, Salo people, Moken people. They prefer to pronounce as Moken, so I'll use Moken in my presentation. So this is where Myanmar located, and this is the Miek archipelago. There's more than 800 islands, and where Mokens are living. Mokens, they are also known as Salo, lives in the Miek archipelago in Myanmar for centuries. There are 12 villages in Myanmar. So these are the villages where they are living. And the yellow highlighted villages, communities, we are working together with them for conservation. Flora, Dongplay, and Lunn. There are about less than 2,000 Mokens in Myanmar according to the 2020 census. Actually, typical Mokens are less than 1,000, and then some are misgeneration in the breeding, in the marriage with Burma, Mon, Karen, and Pa'o. Their living style, that is, they live on the boats we call kaban in the dry season, and on the land in the rainy season. But in the current decades, they stay continuously on the islands like this. Their habit, that is, they prefer to live in the very simple style. You see, the ladies, they're sitting under the house in their free time. They're very happy that. And you can see the children who are playing. So you see the slides, but the Moken children did not want to play on the slides. They prefer to play on the ground. This is this photo I took last week when I was in Big Archipelago for my conservation to visit to my conservation projects. So that means they love nature. Their livelihood, that is, everybody knows that. Their main livelihood, that is fishing in the sea, fishing cuttlefish, we call Kemon, and collecting invertebrates. You know, that is a kind of sea cucumber around the coral reefs, and collecting shellfish, we call pango, on the beach. But now, because of the scarcity of the marine living resources in the current decades, some work as labor in the fishing boats and plantation on the land, but they don't like plantation and prefer to rely on the marine living resources. So therefore, marine living resources are crucial for Mokens for the future in Myanmar. So I'm going to explain how we establish locally managed marine area to conserve the marine living resources in Myanmar, in the Mid Archipelago, for the future of the dependent communities, not only Mokens, but also the other dependent communities like Karen and other ethnic groups who are living on the islands. The main objective of establishment, that is to conserve marine ecosystems and resources for the sustainability of subsistence livelihood of local communities living along the coast and on the islands, and support for long-term effective marine conservation. This is the main objective why we are conserving. We are doing together with the communities for conservation for marine living resources in the Mid Archipelago. And the other objectives, those are enhancing long-term sustainability of resource use, increasing short-term harvesting efficiency, restoring biodiversity and ecosystems, maintaining or restoring breeding biomass of fish or invertebrates, and enhancing the economy and livelihoods, reinforcing customs and traditions, and the main thing, that is empowering the communities living on the islands, including Mokens. These are some objectives how we are conserving the marine living resources on the islands. So we need a strategy. The strategy for the sustainability of marine living resources, that is all together, participation and collaboration. We bring all together in the conservation like this. The local communities, including Mokens, living on the islands, and we work together with government departments, business, and universities and NGOs for marine living resources conservation. Everybody, we work with everybody to conserve marine living resources. This is very important. Not only with the government department, but also business. Business is very important to help the effectiveness of the marine conservation for the island communities. So that is locally managed marine area concept. We use locally managed marine area concept. We use the marine living resources on the island in the Mid Archipelago. The main thing, that is consultation among the stakeholders based on EPIC, that is the key, free, prior, informed consent. We use this in the every consultation meetings. You know, what is marine, we explain to the community that what is locally managed marine area, LMMA, that is an area of nearshore waters and coastal resources that is largely or wholly managed at the local level by the coastal communities who reside or are based in the immediate areas. We explain why we use LMMA concept, how we are going to implement, to explain in detail to the communities. So we use like this diagram. Translate in Burmese. This is a boundary. This is the village. These some areas are no-take zones. Some areas we allow, but some areas are fish sanctuary. The very important habitats like these translate into Burmese and explain to the community in detail. And how we did to establish for the LMME, that is, we dialogue with the village on the island, and we survey important habitats around the island, and we map together with the community. We explain to them these areas are important for the living resources. In Burmese, you see, I translate everything into Burmese. I explain to the community, and these areas should be established as a LMME, locally managed marine area, and these areas they are allowed to the community. These areas allowed to the community to fish in this area. To explain like this, we explain to the community in detail. And these why we conserve these areas? These are natural hatchery and also nurseries for the community, for their marine living resources, and for effectiveness of the conservation, we work together with these people. These people, these stakeholders are very important for the effectiveness of the conservation of the LMME. And also there are several issues we explain to the community. That is, sustainable use of the resources is a key. All the decisions come from the community. That's very important. For this issue, a big process that is crucial. And government or external agencies' role is support, coordination, and technical advice rather than command and control. This is important. For the sustainability, external costs kept very low as community provides main inputs. But we have to, the crucial thing that is the incentives for the community. That is very important. For the zoning is important in the LMME. To get the right zoning, combined with the scientific knowledge, those we get from our surveys, and ethno-fisheries knowledge, that is we got from the community, also including from the Ceylon community. This is important. Based on this, the zoning, we develop the zonings in our LMMEs. So these are some photos. We started working together with the community since 2012. We survey, research surveys, boat trips, secret surveys, shark assessments, saltpond surveys, mangrove surveys, migratory bird surveys, and fishery assessment and data collections in the Mid Archipelago. There were some research surveys photos and some corals, very good corals we recorded in the Mid Archipelago. So explain, this is the result. So about 30% cover, and also some sites are very good coral cover, about 90%, but fish abundance is very low, but invertebrate abundance and diversity is very low, but many sea urchins, and also human impacts. What kind of human impacts we have recorded, like dynamite, academics, discarded nests, bottom trawls near the islands. So these results we explain to the community, and although dynamite sites are like this, we found around the islands. And also we conducted socioeconomic surveys. We got the information from the community. And this is, we're taking the information from the community in the socioeconomic surveys. And after we got several enough information, we developed a draft LMME map for each communities like this. This is for Lunn. This is for Linlon Proa. This is Domplay or LMMEs. And we use those draft LMME maps for the stakeholder consultation meetings for Blue Whale of the community with the government departments. These are several photos. We consult with the communities. So after that, we got this final map for each LMMA. And then we submit to the relevant township level Department of Fisheries together with the signatures by the agreement signatures by the relevant communities for final designation of the LMMAs. So this is a official designation by the government fisheries department for the LMMA establishment in the Mid Archipelago. And also for the incentives, we survey livelihood support for the communities. And we develop, based on their surveys, we develop crab bank. So why we develop crab bank? Some areas like Lunn, crab, they are very abundant in the former time, but now crab population is declining in current decades. Therefore, they want crab population come back to the former condition, former state. Therefore, we provide a crab bank project to the community. This is you know that crab bank, the buried females, we collect from the fish collector and placed in the basket for starting time. And then after all crabs spawn, we send these crabs to the community. After we provision of this crab project for in the first year, in the second season, a lot of crabs come back in that area. Very good result we got. And also, we are working together with the community for the Moken dialects and scripts. There are 3 dialects in the Mid Archipelago: Labi, Jai, and Dong dialects. So Labi, that is especially in the southern part of the Mid Archipelago, like Majungale, and Jai, that is the middle part, like Langan Salons, Langan Mokens, and Dong, that is the northern part, like Dongle or Salon communities. They are a little different each other. Sometimes they cannot understand each other because of their accent. And we are developing the Moken alphabets with Myanmar scripts, like this. This is a man who is developing Moken alphabets in the who based in Langan Dongleo in the Dong Island. And also, this is very interesting. I don't know what kind of painting that was painted for a long time. We don't know how many years that was painted on the wall in one of the islands on the cliff. This is very interesting. If somebody can explain what is the meaning of this painting, that is very interesting for us. We don't know when this was painted and what is the meaning of this painting. So this is how we developed for the locally managed marine area LMMAs for the Salon community in the Mid Archipelago. Thank you. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kozolo. I do have some questions.
Welcome, Maxime.
From the location I best know, which is Langan. As you mentioned, and now in almost every village, there are a lot of intermarriages between Moken and Burmese or Kenyan people. And what is obvious from our research is that the different, I mean, one Moken group, like in Langan, may be kind of atomized or belong to different clientelist group based on their interrelation with these Burmese settlers. Right. And from what I learned from Langan is that since the LMNA was in place, because of the restriction put through this plan. For instance, big trawlers that used to illegally fish in this area don't come anymore, or much less to the village, so that the economical inputs they used to provide to the village shops, but also donations to the Burmese pagodas and so on. This has created some tensions among the different Burmese and Burmese Moken groups that you can find in the village. So my question is, do you try to tackle these issues in your eliminate plan, and if so, how do you do it?
Thank you very much, Maxime. This is a very important question. You see, LMMA concept, locally managed marine area, that is very fast concept in Myanmar. So we try to work together with the government and also with the community, island communities, not only Mokens, but also with Korean and other Burma Moken groups to establish for the marine living resources. You know, the marine living resources are declining very severely in current decades. Everybody knows that. Therefore, Mokens and also island communities, they depend mainly on the marine living resources, especially Langan area. Langan area, there is no good place, no suitable place for agriculture. So they depend on the, especially on the, mainly on the marine living resources. Therefore, so, and also Langan area, there's very good corals are there. All around the Mid Archipelago, Langan area corals are the best. Therefore, we like to conserve those, protect those corals and conserve those corals. Therefore, we dialogue with the community, everybody, and with true Mokens, those they are living in the Zibing or Zibing or in the southern part of the Langan, Zibing, and also with the Burma Mokens in the main Langan village. We talk together with them. We should conserve, and also yes, you know that that is very difficult to negotiate among them. And also the other thing, that's the land grabbing by the power farm in that area. That's a very big issue that is happening all of the Mid Archipelago. The cronies, they want many marine areas to develop their business, but we try to dialogue with the community. We want to conserve, and also we work with the fisheries department, government department. That's very important. That's very important. We need support from the government. If they don't support, that is impossible to designate officially LMMA in that area. And also the other thing that is we work with the Myanmar Fisheries Federation, the business people. So this is very important. Therefore, every stakeholders are important to establish. If to establish the conservation area, the MFF, Myanmar Fisheries Federation, if they don't agree, that is very difficult to establish conservation area. We try to work together with them. So after dialoguing, negotiating with all of the stakeholders, at last I got the agreement to establish. So the main thing that is, you see the Mokens in every island, they do not want to work as a plantation on the island. You see, but they are don't play or they are Korean and Burma, Korean and Moken, they are living, and also in Linglong Proa. Linglong and Proa, they are Korean and Moken are living. The Korean people, they can survive with plantation. But Moken, they do not want to do plantation. So therefore, this is, I explained to them that this is for you, for Mokens, this is for you, this is very important for them. So therefore, after that, we got agreement. Because the negotiation, that is very important, not only with the community, but also with other communities and also with the business, and also support by the government. So I, how to say, I try to get agreement with the dialogue with the several communities to get agreement for the establishment of LMMA in each villages. Yes, that is what we have done. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think Fabienne has a question.
Yes, can you hear me? Because I have some problems with my camera.
Sure. I can hear, yes.
So thank you for your very interesting presentation. And I just have a question. So you said that you are transforming an oral language into a written language. So I would like to know how you involve the Moken of the different groups in this project, and so and also your working method and how the Moken react with this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Please. Actually, I've already explained that there are three dialects in Mid Archipelago: Labi, Jai, and Dong. So we start working together with this Dong community. This guy is living in the Dong village, and he is trying to develop the Moken script with Myanmar alphabets. You see, these are Moken language developed by the Myanmar alphabet. Moken, come on. I don't know what is this, but this is in Myanmar language. This is Do Moken. We Moken. So like this, and this is the land. This is in Moken language using the Myanmar alphabet. This is Palay. So he is developing with using the Myanmar alphabets for the Moken language. But I've already mentioned that there are three dialects. They are different intonations, different accent. Sometimes they don't understand each other. Labi accent, Jai accent, and Dong accent, they don't understand each other. When they meet each other, they don't understand what they are talking. So like that. So that is how we are working together with this guy to develop the Moken language, Moken alphabet. Yes.
Yeah, but how do you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Please.
No, I was wondering how you work with the Moken. I mean, how do you? How do they react to see their written their language as a written language? Because it's not supposed to be a written language, and for Moken it could be, I don't know, it could be maybe for them a problem for their, I don't know, for the dynamic of their society, for the dynamic of their rituals. Because as I have understood, but I may be wrong, written language is forbidden in their in the Moken society. So
really, we don't know that.
I wonder.
Yeah. That is very,
I mean, maybe the first question would be, for instance, this man who is helping with translation. Who is he?
He is sorry, I forget his name.
No,
he based in Dongpale. He is like Karen. He is Karen.
Okay.
So yes, he developed these scripts. This is Myanmar. I can read it. I can understand. This is Do Moken. We Moken in English. This is using Myanmar script, Myanmar alphabet. This is Moken language. I cannot read. Maybe Moken, Kamo, or something like that. I don't know. So, but they are creating. They are creating. And
So
also, yes, and also in Dongpale government state middle school, the government that the village appointed Moken language teachers in Dongpale. So those teachers are teaching to their students, to their children about the Moken language. That is officially allowed by the Myanmar government. Yes, that is the situation. Yes, current situation. Yes, I don't know. Oh, that is forbidden. I don't know that.
Well, if I may, the transcription. First of all, from my experience, all the Moken understand each other throughout the archipelago. There is, yes, some differences, of course. The closest you are to Mergui and the north, the more Burmese words enter the language, of course, and there is some tonalization, sometimes or tonic accent which arose, but in fact there is no problem because me myself who study Moken in the south, I have no problem to understand the people of Dung, and no problem. Yes,
please.
Sometimes I don't understand a few words and a few sentences, but it's very easy to get out of it and find a way to exchange very easily. So there is no free dialects, but for me. Second thing is, it's like in Thai. The Thai, the Professor Naruman can tell you that they also, and that's a big question, and I wanted to answer it, but it's too complicated. I started to do it. I wanted to do it with Lariche and with Christopher Court and with other people to how to transcript this language. But if you transcript in Thai, then you have a problem with the tone in Thai. You transcript with the Myanmar script, you have also the tones. And when I show the transcription to professor in France and in Myanmar, they say that it's not a good way because the tone are absolutely mixed up and well, it's not. It doesn't reflect exactly the Moken language, and it deserves the Myanmar, let's say, purity of language. But either way, it is not a good way. So we have first the Thai transcription. You have the Burmese transcription. Maybe if this transcription is the same that the missionary did the first time in Dung. I think it's came from this. We try to teach the Moken. And when we, yes, it's a Karen, we'll try to teach, and now they make a village of Moken Christians mixed with Karen, and the aim of this village is clearly to not destroy, to cancel the Moken language. And we went there 2 years ago with Maxime, and that was clear. The Karen, when we speak with the Moken village there, the Karen forbid them to speak Moken to us. Anyway, that's the missionary way. But another problem is not that the language and the scripture is forbidden to the Moken. It's in their tradition to be involved with the dominant people is not a good strategy because they know they will always be a second level citizen, whatever the situation is. They always be like this, and they think it will be always like this. So the better for them is to get the lower and then be forgotten by the other one, not to be involved. That's the kind of the strategy. So it's very difficult to bring them. What you do is necessary. Huh? You have to do it, and I agree, but it's very difficult to put the society to have a real insensitive in doing and following the rule, even if you discuss with them. The interdiction of writing came from a myth which say that the real scripture of the Moken are the design on the turtle, which are on the carapace, comme on dit, shell of the turtle. The shell of the turtle is the real beer of the first script of the Moken, and the Moken eats the turtle, and even they use the shell of the turtle to make a lot of things. So in fact, they, let's say, I call it a social anthropophagy. That means everything which can open to the outside is forbidden. Scripture, for instance, will bring them to school, and in school they will be considered at second level citizens. So no writing. That's a rule. It's not followed by everyone, of course, and some can be trained, but it's a general rule. So this first difficulty will to be one, make Thai, Moken, and even us, Westerner, how to transcript this Moken language. Myself, I use the International Phonetic Alphabet, and I have a few hundred pages of Moken transcription. So which is the good one? The Taiwan, the Myanmar one, or the Western one? So there is a real work to do there. We have to reunite with the Thai and the Myanmar people and us, and to win the Moken, and to try to find first a way to how to translate in which script. Voilà. And you can't divide the population according to the state, because you divide the population and you segment it. Thai are not the main. If you make Thai Moken going in Thai school and then the Myanmar Moken going in Myanmar school, you divide the population, and then you divide also the work you are trying to do throughout the Mergui archipelago. But that's not your no fault. It's a cultural problem from the Moken themselves, but it has to be understood. The third thing I would like to tell you is the drawing on the wall you show us. We went to see it a few times, and we asked a lot of questions about this one. So everybody tells us the local one. Local people and even some knowledgeable, yes, this one, knowledgeable people told us two things. First, it's 6,000 years old. Why 6,000? I don't know. The second thing they say is that inside there is a temple. Inside the mountains of this, there is a hidden temple. We went with two archaeologists, French archaeologists, to see it. The only thing they can tell us is to say it was not 6,000 years old. Well, that's the only thing I can tell you. So after we asked the Moken if they know about this, nothing, not a word, absolutely nothing. And that's raised a big question. And it's one of the reasons why this webinar was important, because archaeologists now want to link this kind of rock drawing, and this is why we invite an archaeologist to explain us the relationship between rock painting and Austronesian in the area, because the archaeologists want absolutely to have some proof that the nomads are here for forever. That means since the beginning. Or no, we know they are not there from 15,000 years ago. I don't know how many years ago. But they are trying to find a way, a link to put this drawing. We can find them in Thailand also. There is a lot in the south. And we have to clearly say that no, it is not from the Gypsy now, or Aklawai, either Moken or Moklen. It could be other population. Who knows? There is maybe a population before the Moken arrives there. We are on the littoral, and the littoral is very huge. You have 2,000 kilometers, if I remember well. So there is some population there, of course. And it's very difficult to know. But one, I said it will not, nothing to do with the Gypsy. And second thing is, it is not 6,000 years old, as the people say. Well, now I cannot say anything anymore. Well, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your long explanation. I got hello.
Yeah.
Hello, can I respond? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, I know you, Jack, and also you work in the Mixed Archipelago, especially based in Machungale. I know that you and also Maxime. I know.
Yeah, but we went in Doom as well, and we find the Doom very interesting, yes. And because it is not what you see, what it's important. For instance, even me, at the beginning, I consider Dung Island and Ross Island as a, let's say, lost Moken. They have no more spirit pole ceremony. There is missionary. There is a lot of too many people, too many Burmese, too many fishermen.
Yes.
But in fact, this is the place where we find the last traditional boat with sail, even if it was not made of palm. So there is still a knowledge there, which is very important. And another thing I noticed in Dung is when they are tired of being, let's say, oppressed or asked many things by the Burmese or missionaries, they just go away. Well, and my last question will be, you started in 2012, huh? Your work.
Yeah, sure. Right.
Since 2012, do you see any changes regarding the stock for fish or sea slug or anything? Do you see? Do you know if there is some changes?
Okay.
In numbers.
Thank you very much. I have to respond a lot of your questions. Yes, I'm going to respond first. The last question. Living resources, they change a lot. But in our LMMA islands, in Dombaleo, especially in Dombaleo, marine resources are re-abandoned after establishment of LMMA. That is, all information came from the community. Yes, but in the other islands, but those are declining seriously, and also the vessel, the fishing vessels, come and fish near the islands. Therefore, a lot of habitats, especially corals, are damaging in those areas. Yes, but some our LMMA islands, the populations are re-abandoned. Okay. And the other one, there are three dialects I explained to you. That is, I got information from the Mokens, from project villages, the Jai, Labi, and Dong. That is, and also we appointed Moken facilitator, village facilitator from the village in our project islands. So in the meetings, they meet each other. Sometimes, I mean, they don't understand. Yes, I agree that they speak the same language, but their accent, that is totally different. You see, in Myanmar language, the way people, Nye people, and Rakhine people in Myanmar, we are talking the same language, but different accent. Therefore, yes, please. So therefore, sometimes they don't understand totally what they are talking. That is what is happening in our team, and also the other thing, that is we are the creation of the alphabet, that is forbidden. But for Myanmar, we have to conserve the Moken people for our country. This is one of our treasure of our country. So
I agree. We have to keep it. And although I just say what the Moken think and how to get out this story. Yes, we have to keep it. That's what I do. It's all my work. But how you then transmit all this knowledge, and if you want to communicate with the Moken with their own meanings of dealing with nature and new rules and so on, you have first to find a way to communicate, and then how to put this rule into a script which have some way which will be for all the Sigipsi, including the Thai. So I think it's very important that there is a linguistic discussion which should choose which language to be put in, either we choose by number. There is more in Myanmar, so we make it in Myanmar. What the Thai will decide, we don't know, because there is school in Thailand also. Do we decide? That's the problem with nomadic population. If you put in a so-called globalization of the world, you put a border, and then you cut the population in two. And after you put a language in Thai, another in Myanmar, you cut again the population. Then you have the ID. The ID will be Thai and Myanmar. So at the moment, it worked because it's not really in shape and not into law. But soon it will be enforced by law. So if you put all the, and I know everybody wants to, every government wants to put the Moken at school because they think it's very important, and I agree. But how to make the Moken understand that it's necessary to go at school, and first of all is to have the right script for them, because the script I read some of paper, not of the person you show, but some others. And what it's written in it is absolutely awful. The message, not the language. The message is clearly Moken has to stop to go at sea because sea is the devil. So you have to be on land. And if you can be a fisherman, the man go to fish, but the woman and the children has to stay in land, go to school, and so on and so on. So it's kind of an ideological things behind all this scripture question, which has to be answered before enforcing them with the community itself. So you see, before, I think they will understand very well how to deal and manage the coral, the sea, the resources. They will do that very well because they know the survival is involved. They will do that very well, and they can be a very useful, knowledgeable for you. But the first thing is to agree with them in which transcription and how we will put some of them in the school. Could be the son of the married Moken with Burmese, because if the father is Burmese, he wants his son to go to school. So you know there is variation in between the community.
Okay,
so
okay.
I think that the first question has to be answered before trying to put some rules in it. Voilà.
Okay, I agree that yes, but we are working for conservation.
Oh yeah. We need
to stand the signboards, write several languages, English language, Burmese language, Moken language, Karen language, in all of the villages. Therefore, we need some scripts. Yeah, I agree. All of the Moken communities living in the Mid Archipelago or in Singapore, in Thailand, or in Indonesia, they should have the same alphabets or something like that. But for Myanmar, so we need something to write.
Yeah, but next time okay. Before the project, I will try to put together everybody involved in the development or integration of Moken, and then decide once for all how to do that. I think I am too long and I have to stop to speak. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
The moderator told me I speak too much. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, anyway, it's obvious that all these programs and developments again and again as a question of Moken and other nomadic populations integration to a larger framework, which is now the nation state. And but the linguistic question makes a perfect transition to listen to Joe's presentation, who is from Chulalongkorn University. He's a linguist, and you will talk to us about what linguistic can teach us about possible differentiations between these nomadic groups, right? So I let you the floor now. Thank you. Joe, you're mute. Your mic is muted.
All right, thank you. Good morning and good evening, everyone. I'm Joe, and first I would like to thank Ajahn Narumon and Jacques and Maxime for giving me an opportunity to be here to share what I've learned about the Moken and the Moklan, about the Sea people in Thailand from a linguistic point of view. Well, I have to say it's actually very exciting for me to be getting back to working on Moken and Moklan, because I did some preliminary work over 10 years ago and didn't get back into to work on this language until a couple of years ago when Ajahn Narumon suggested that I work on a dictionary of Moklan, which I'm still working on. So me and my team are developing a Thai-based orthography of Moklan and making a dictionary. It's a slow process, but we are still working on it. And so today, what I'll be talking about is, so my objective today is not to give you definite answers on any particular questions, but to show you how linguistics or analysis of the language can help us understand the prehistory of these sea people. So my talk today is a product of a very preliminary, so a product of a synthesis of what I've read in the past few months on the linguistic history of the sea peoples, and also on my preliminary work, very much in progress that I'm doing. So any comments from some of the audience would be highly appreciated. The sea people in Thailand consists of 3 distinct groups. They're distinct culturally and linguistically. So they are the Moken, the Moklan, and the Uraklawoit. The first 2, the Moken and the Moklan, are linguistically closely related to each other. Despite the 2 different labels, they are extremely similar. One could say that they are dialects of the same language, but classifying something as a dialect or a language is a political statement rather than a linguistic statement. So in the literature, we refer to them as 2 different, Moken and Moklan as 2 different groups, and that's what I will be, that's the convention I'll be doing today. Like I said, the Moken and the Moklan are closely related, but the Uraklawoit language is relatively distant from the other 2 languages. However, the 3 of them are all in this language family called Austronesian. Everyone is familiar with it. But we classified Austronesian languages into different sub-branches. Most of the branches are in Taiwan, which is the homeland of the Austronesian. But what we have in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, most of them belong to the Western branch of the Western branch of the Malayo-Polynesian subfamily. So they're all Western Malayo-Polynesian languages. So even though the 3 groups even though the Uraklawoit and the Moken Moklan are a little distant to each other, but they're all in the same group. So you can see a lot of similarities among them. This table gives you a comparison of Malay, Uraklawoi, Moken, and Moklan. Malay here, I use the word Malay here in a very generic sense, which includes all the dialects of Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. But the form that I give in this column, in this slide, is from Standard Malay. So you can see that Uraklawoi and Malay are very similar to each other, and the Moken and Moklan are similar to each other on the other hand. So linguists classify Uraklawoi as so they say Uraklawoi is a Malay language, but it's clear, and a lot of people have established that Uraklawoi is actually a Malay dialect. Linguistically, it's a Malay dialect, even though politically we give it a different label because of ethno-cultural reason. So as a linguist, I'm very interested in how the languages came to be spoken in the west coast of Thailand. The reason is that, this is especially true for the Moken and the Moklan, they are not closely related to other Austronesian languages in the area. So the question is then where they came from. Even the Uraklawoi language is clearly a Malay language, but we have no written record about it until the early 20th century. So their journey, their settlements in Thailand is a big question. So people have paid attention to migration stories as the only sources of information about the sea people's journey to the Andaman coast of southern Thailand before the 20th century. But as you know, these migration stories are epics or tales, which are simultaneously oral histories and myths. So we cannot take them at face value. However, migration stories they are useful in providing us with hypotheses that we can test against other kinds of evidence. And today I'll show how I use linguistic evidence to test hypotheses that are formed based on these migration stories. So language is like a record of language's historical records of the people who speak it. Language data can shed light on the migration history of ethnic groups, and two standard way of studying linguistic history of a particular language is to look at shared innovations and loan words. So shared innovations, by shared innovations, we mean, we'll see what we mean by shared innovations, but what it does is it gives you a geographical origin of the word, of the language. And we can look at loan words, which gives you the history of the inter-ethnic relations. So by using these techniques, we can support or refute hypotheses proposed on the basis of archaeology, oral history, mythology, and so on and so forth. So what is a shared innovation? Well, I'll be looking at particularly at shared phonological innovations. Shared phonological innovations refers any common sound changes among related group of languages. So shared innovations are usually taken to be evidence for common ancestry. The idea is because the shared innovations is an event that happened in the ancestor language. So the trace of this change is inherited in the daughter languages. So if we can identify shared innovations, we come closer to a historical event that happened in the past. But one must be careful to distinguish between shared innovations and other three types of similarities, which are shared retentions, diffused innovations, and parallel developments. Due to the constraints of time, I'm not gonna go through these three, but I'll just show you what I've analyzed as shared innovations. This is a famous case of how we use shared innovation to identify homeland. So the famous language, the westernmost Austronesian language in the world is Malagasy, spoken in Madagascar. Linguists have shown that they have proposed that Malagasy, Malagasy is speakers of Malagasy migrated from Borneo several centuries ago, and one of the pieces of evidence that they bring is the shared innovation. So Proto-Austronesian, which is the ancestor language of all Austronesian languages. So if you have li, the syllable li in Proto-Austronesian, you would get di in Malagasy and Ma'anyan. So what happened was that at one point in history, when Malagasy and Ma'anyan were still the same language, when they hadn't split into two different languages, there was this one change that transformed li into di. And this innovation is not found elsewhere in the Austronesian world. So if you compare Malagasy and Ma'anyan, which has li going to di, you can group them as one group, as opposed to the other languages which still retain li, as in Malay and Moken. So because Malagasy share this innovation with Ma'anyan, so we classify Malagasy as a close relative as Ma'anyan. And by implication, linguists believe that Malagasy was spoken in Borneo. The ancestor of Malagasy, the pre-Malagasy, was spoken on Borneo, close to Ma'anyan, because they had the same origin. We can also look at layers of loanwords. Loanwords are lexical items adopted from one donor language by a recipient language. The directions are often recoverable by examining patterns and chronology of sound changes in the two languages involved. Sometimes we just get a handful of loanwords from one language, but a lot of time we are lucky and get a relatively large set of loanwords from the same source at approximately the same time, and that form a layer that are datable based on relative chronology. Layers of loanwords indicate significant language contact, and thus suggest that there was an inter-ethnic exchanges between speakers of those two languages. Let's look at Malagasy again. There's been several studies that look at Malay loanwords in Malagasy, which points to contact with with Malay before migration from Borneo to Madagascar. You can see these are some examples of Malay loanwords in Malagasy. They don't look like Malay words, but if you do linguistic analysis, they actually go back to something that looks more similar to the Malay forms that we give here. Notice that the Malay loanwords in Malagasy also include Sanskrit words that had been borrowed into Malay before it was borrowed into Malagasy later. What we'll look at today is two case studies, one from Urak Lawoi and one from Moken Moklan. The first case study is about the origin of Urak Lawoi based on the myth of Gunung Jerai. Urak Lawoi speakers now live along the coast of Stun, Krabi, and Phuket provinces in the western coast of Thailand. The ethnonym Urak Lawoi is cognate to Malay Orang Laut, which means sea people. Urak Lawoi communities practice pre-Islamic animism, and we don't know where they came from before the 1890s when they were invited to settle in Lipe Island to help to mark Lipe Island as part of Thailand when the British and the Siamese were drawing their border lines. There were a lot of different hypotheses in the literature about where the Urak Lawoi came from. Some of them aren't that really likely, like the Yangtze River. That's a little bit too far-fetched. But so there are hypotheses that say they came from Borneo. They were indigenous people who lived in Malaysia before the Malay, and some people say that they're from Langkawi. That is, it's the north. So they are from northwestern. They're from northwestern states of Malaysia, basically. Interestingly, there's this myth of Nabino recorded by Hogan in 1972. The story goes that God sent Nabino to convert people of Gunung Jerai to Islam, but they refused. So they had to disperse from their homeland and became monkeys and squirrels. And those that didn't become animals became the Urak Lawoi people. The Urak Lawoi people on Adang and Lanta all believe that their ancestors came from Gunung Jerai. So this is Gunung Jerai in Kedah, Malaysia. It's the highest peak in the area, so navigator used it as a navigation point in historical times. Like I said, Urak Lawoi is a Malay dialect, essentially. They're part of this large Malay speaking area. What I'm gonna show you today is I'm gonna show you that Urak Lawoi have shared innovations that unequivocally points to northwestern Malaysia as the origin of the Urak Lawoi. So this is I haven't worked on Urak Lawoi myself, but this is a synthesis of previous studies by a few other other researchers, and the shared innovations that show that Urak Lawoi belongs to the northwestern group of Malay dialects is the change from S to ich, to ich, and the change from menenge to perteke. So this table gives a comparison of the different Malay dialects in the area. So Malaysian here refers to the standard dialect. Patani, of course, the Malay dialect of Patani. Kedah, I don't have the actual words, but from the literature review, I know that this would be the reflex of S in Kedah. Stun, the southernmost province on the west coast of Thailand, has changed S into H. It has changed S into IH. So pedas became pedeh, ratus become khatui. This is also what happened in Chalung, which is also in Stun, but in a different village. The language is a little different, but mostly the same. And this is exactly what we see in Urak Lawoi. So we see S going to ish in words like Badai, Ratui, and Guroi. So this is one shared innovation that's one phonological innovation shared by Stun, Chalung, and Urak Lawoi, and not shared with any other Malay dialects. This one is unequivocally a Northwestern Malay innovation, particularly in some areas of Stun and Nakhon Si Thammarat. So final menenge became perteke in some very Northwestern dialects of Malay. So in Chalung, for example, malam for night became malap, jarum became jarop, bukan became bukat, and so on and so forth. And this is exactly what we see in Urak Lawoi. And we don't find this change in other Malay dialects. So this really connects Urak Lawoi with the dialect of Chalong. Although they share these two phonological innovations, Urak Lawoi are not identical to Stun and Chalong. They actually, there are still some difference, like the reflex of L and the reflex of R, but I'm not gonna go into details about this. So what we see from looking at these shared innovations, we see that Urak Lawoi shares a couple of innovations with Northwestern varieties, especially the dialect spoken in Chalung village in Stun province of Thailand. The linguistic evidence is then consistent with the hypothesis that Urak Lawoi speakers are descendants of Malay speakers from Northwestern Malay states, lending credibility to the story that Urak Lawoi speakers migrated from Gunung Jarai in Kedah. What's even more interesting for me, I think, and this needs in-depth investigation, is that the Malay varieties spoken in Bulon, Phi, Lanta, and Sile Islands cluster with Urak Lawoi in terms of these phonological innovation. So basically they speak the Malay and the Urak Lawoi on these islands speak very similar languages, but they're labeled either Malay or Urak Lawoi on cultural reasons. Another interesting point is that there are very few Arabic vocabulary in Urak Lawoi, which suggests that its speakers were never in close contact with Malay Muslims, suggesting that Urak Lawoi speakers were perhaps proto-Malay people who did not convert to Islam. And if we go to Bulon, Phi, Lanta, and Sire, we might be seeing this very same process going on. So if you speak Malay and you are Muslim, then you are Malay. If you aren't Muslim, you are Urak Lawoi, even though you speak the same language. Then I would like to talk about the Moken Moklan as part of the Malay world. The Moken and Moklan are scattered on the islands of Phang Nga and Ranong province in Thailand and of Mergui in Myanmar. And the Moklan, on the other hand, are settled on the western coast of Thailand, especially in Phang Nga and Phuket. These two languages belong to Western Malayo-Polynesian, but its exact position is unknown. It's not that closely related to Malay. So the question is where they come from. The general sentiment perhaps is that they are in the same subgroup as Chamic languages, which is more closely related to Achanese than to Malay. So this is a family tree that was done using phylogenetic computations. This is done by Russell Gray, based on basic vocabulary. You can see that Moken is clustered with Hainan Cham, Phan Rang Cham, and Tru, while Malay is in a very distant branch of the family. So there are also many hypotheses regarding the origin of the Moken Moklan. Some people say Larish believes they came from the eastern coast of Thailand, so from the Gulf of Thailand side of the peninsula, and they move across the peninsula to the western coast. White says they came from upper part of the Malay Peninsula, or from northern Mergui, so coming down south. So it's a north to south migration. Sulfur, Ivanov, and Blast think that they come from the south to migrating to the north. So either from Riau, Linda Archipelago, or from northern Sumatra. And when we look at migration stories, we do see traces. We can form hypotheses about the origin, linguistic hypothesis about the origin of Moken and Moklan. The first story that I think is significant is the epic of Gaman the Malay, recorded by Jacques in his monumental volume of Moklan epics and myths. The Moken. So according to this story, the Moken lived under Queen Vivienne's rule in an unknown location. And then one day, Gaman the Malay arrived also from an unknown land, bringing rice and clothes, which was unknown to them until then. Gaman came and went and came back again when he married Queen Vivienne, but soon he cheated on her with her sister. So they were both expelled, and then they became enslaved by the white men and the Burmese. In this story, the Malay is thus portrayed as an oppressor and outsider, but also bringer of civilization and also ancestor. Another story is not from does not belong to the Moken, but to the Moklan, the one on the coast. So they have this story of grandfather Sampan, who they believe is their ancestor. Now every year they have an annual right to make offerings to his shrine on Bangsak Beach in Takuapa. in Phang. This epic recounts the journey of grandfather Sampan, who lived in Nakhon Si Thammarat and went on a mission sent by his brother-in-law to find the skin of an ogre. Only 3 people survived the journey and came back to Bang Sap. And on the back of the fish packet, Sampan then went back to Nakhon Si Thammarat and gave the ogre skin to his brother-in-law, but he was somehow later exiled from Nakhon Si Thammarat by his brother-in-law. So he left on a big boat to find a new land, and his followers followed him in smaller boats, but they could not keep up with him. So they settled along the coast and start cultivating fields. So that's how the Moken explain how they got there to on the west coast of Phang. Because it's not, when we look at shared innovations with Moken and Moken with other languages, we don't see a very clear picture. So I would like to look at loanwords instead. And when you look at loanwords in Moken and Moken, you can see a few sources of these loanwords. The easiest loanwords to detect is Thai. So you see a lot of Thai loanwords in Moken. The reason they're very easy to detect is that they are very recent. They are the most recent source of loanwords in Moken. So we are not going to talk about them. The other 3 sources are Aslian and Monic languages, and I would really love to hear Jeff's opinion about this. Then Malay is a big source of loanwords for in Moken. And I've noticed a few words that might be of Khmer origin, but I'm not sure. Okay, so Moken and Moken are known for having Mon Khmer elements in their language. These elements are reconstructible to the ancestral language of Moken. So these are all very old. So these are old words, but they ultimately go back to Austroasiatic languages like, so Austroasiatic languages, specifically the Aslian languages like and the Monic languages. So for example, the word for iron and nail or nail is Boutry in Moken, Boutry in Moken. These are from they are from Boutry in Monic or Basi in Aslian. It's not clear where they came, which one they came from. Or Katam. Katam is a very common Mon Khmer word for a crab. Duck is specific to Monic. You don't see Ada for duck in any other branch of Austroasiatic. So Ada really points to a Monic origin. Grandchild, Dot is a clearly Austroasiatic loanword. What's interesting is that in Moken and Moken, it ends with a glottal stop. So dot. So this adduction in your throat at the end of the word dot. And this is shared by Aslian languages. So in other languages, you don't see this glottal stop in this word. So it really points to Aslian, an Aslian origin of this word for grandchild. Bird is also a an Austroasiatic origin, but it's found in Monic Aslian specifically. So they're clearly something that the Moken acquired in the Malay Peninsula. What's interesting is that it's also shared with Austronesian and Chamic languages. So this is very curious. And people have come up with stories about how Austronesian and Moken and Chamic are related to each other. What's crucial about these Austroasiatic loanwords is that these words, well, not except for bird, these are all shared by Malay. So it's really not clear whether they got all of these from Austroasiatic directly, or they got them through Malay, or a combination of both. But what we see here is that they were Malay and Moken and these Austroasiatic languages were in contact with each other. They were in the same ecology. The next source of loanword in Moken and Moken is, of course, Malay. So this is not new. People have mentioned possibilities of Malay loanwords in Moken and Moken, but no one has done a systematic analysis of these loanwords. And the reason is that given that they are both Austronesian languages, it's really hard to tease apart the words that Moken and Moken inherited from Proto-Austronesian, from words that they got from their relatives from Malay. But these are things that I think they are Malay loanwords. The word for spicy, putrid, for mouse, for cow, to leak, anchor. There are a few more that I have identified, but I believe if we know more about the history, the phonological history of Moken, we would identify a lot more Malay loanwords in Moken. And if you see the word for spicy, pedah for spicy, this really points to Urak Lawoi or some northwestern Malay source of this Malay loanword. So it's not any Malay dialect, it's the northwestern Malay varieties that lends these words into Moken and Moken. We also have loanwords from other languages that Moken and Moken borrowed through Malay. So, for example, the word for shoulder, bahoy in Moken and bahoy in Moken, it's from Sanskrit bahu, which was first borrowed into Malay as bahu and then into Moken. The word for elephant, gajah, or the yah in Moken. This is also a Sanskrit loanword found in Malay. You also get the word for soap, which is from Arabic. But what's very interesting to me is that there's really no Portuguese loanwords, even though in Malay dialects now you see quite a few Portuguese loanwords in these languages, in other dialects. But we don't see any Portuguese loanwords in Moken and Moken at all. In addition to those three or four sources of loanwords, I've identified a few curious words in Moken, especially Moken, that look like a Khmer word. These are not found in other branches of Austroasiatic that I know of. I looked it up in a comparative Austroasiatic database, and I only found these in Khmer, in the Khmer branch, and not in Aslian or in Monic branch. For example, the words for to put in Moken is duk. It's from Old Khmer duk. To cook, dut is this might be related to Moken dot, which means to cook. In Khmer, it means to set fire to something. Ot, which means to lack something. That's a very Khmer word. And this one is curious. It's a curious one. It's certainly a Khmer word, but it's also found in Malay. So the word for gold is mia in Khmer, but in old Khmer it was pronounced mas, and that's the pronunciation we see in Malay. In Moken, I didn't write it down. I'm sorry. It's mai, and show a northwestern looking kind of Malay variety. So what we see from looking at these loanwords, it seems that Malay loanwords and loanwords from other languages shared with Malay indicate that the Moken and Moken were part of the Malay speaking ecology, and that Malay related borrowings are older than Thai related borrowing, suggests that it was a south to north migration consistent with the Riau Lingga and the Northern Sumatra hypothesis, rather than other hypotheses that had been put forward. This is consistent with Jacques' report that many Moken speakers also spoke Malay and listened to Malay radio programs. But there seems to be something to the story of grandfather Sampan who came from Nakhon Si Thammarat. If the possible Khmer loanwords are indeed Khmer loanwords in Moken, this would suggest that part of the Moken ancestry may have indeed come from the other side of the isthmus. So somewhere in Nakhon Si Thammarat, which had a trade contact with the Khmer Empire. That's a possibility, a very intriguing one indeed. Or another possibility is that there was a trans-peninsular contact between the Khmer traders who came to southern Thailand before the arrival of Western commerce, and you can see the presence of Khmer language in southern Thailand. There's a very nice dissertation written on the old Khmer words in toponyms and in southern Thai, toponyms in southern Thailand and in southern Thai dialects. But these possible Khmer loanwords are few, and their etymologies are quite uncertain. But again, the similarities are kind of uncanny. So I think we should. I think it's worth pursuing. Maybe we will uncover more of these Khmer-looking etyma. So to conclude, although migration stories cannot be taken at face value, they help researchers form hypotheses that can be tested. Language is an excellent record of its speaker's history, so that historical linguistic analysis can shed light on the prehistory of the Sea people. The past reconstructed by linguistic analysis is incomplete for sure, but it formed a key component in the interdisciplinary attempt to place the Sea people within the Western Austronesian history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I'm sure, Jacques, you have plenty of
well,
questions.
But no, I won't speak too much because there is too much things to say, and it will bother everybody, and I have no time. So I am not competent enough to criticize what you say, but it's yes, the same conclusion that I came. For me, the only thing is I don't see the Moken coming from the eastern part. The story of Sampan, if you can compare a few story, they came sometimes from Panga province and go to Nakhon Si Thammarat. Either they are in Nakhon Si Thammarat or go to Takwapa in Panga. So there is a link, of course, and the link is still very strong. And this is very important. That if you can put a spot on this Nakhon Si Thammarat language in the Moken language, that would be very good, very nice, because I think this is the time, this story, let's say, again, end of 16th, the beginning of 17th century, what we call the slave temple. At that time, they were, in fact, the Sampan story is something would copy the idea of what is the slavery, and Moken translated in segmentation and discussion and with the Thai. There is a limit to the integration, and when the limit of integration is done, there is a segmentation of the population, and the segmentation between Moken and Moken appear at the time of this Sampan. And you have to keep in mind that there is the same story in the Moken also, which is a packet fish, not exactly the same, huh? But it reminds that Moken and Moken have the same myth of origin of separation, not of creation, but of separation. Voilà. And I will stop there. And the other thing is coming the language from Sumatra that you mentioned quite a lot. The only thing I can say that I stopped my linguistic research when I went to see Udricourt, who told me that because I have problem with some phoneme in the Moken, and he related that to Sumatra. And I clearly remind the word. I will send it the list of words that for him are coming from Sumatra before I don't know which year. So clearly the first person who indicate to me that the Moken are from south and go up north, it was Udricourt based on linguistics, but after I didn't work enough on linguistics. That's maybe Benjamin, you want to say something? He disappear?
Yeah, sure. I agree with pretty well all that you've said. I want to correct one or two things, but I will be going through similar material next week. And this area, the isthmus, is very, very complex linguistically, especially if you push back 2,000 or 3,000 years, which I've been trying to do.
Yeah.
So that's what I will try and develop next week. I just wanted to say that I think it's now recognized that Moken and Moken represent a quite separate top-level branch within Malayo-Polynesian, not closely related to any other subgroup. And this is primarily the work of Alexander Smith, who's last student. I'll talk about that next week. Secondly, the idea that it's related to Chamik, that really that can't really be sustained. Chamic and Malaic are very, very close to each other, and probably were mutually comprehensible 2,000 years ago. And the Austroasiatic elements in Chamic have been picked up probably from something like the Bahnaric languages in, when some Cham speakers moved across to North Sumatra, presumably touching on the peninsula on their way there. So quite a few people have been writing about this this part of the story. I can't develop it very much next week, but the book I'm writing on the ethnohistory of the Malay world has 2 chapters on the linguistic evidence. And what I want to say next week is what I found out about Moken and Moklen being mixed up with this story, which surprised me, and I only found it out a few months ago. So I want to, the section, relatively short section on Moken, Moklen and the Malay world is what I'll talk about next week. But yeah, I agree with you. Most of these very complicated interrelations, especially in loanwords, indicate that that area has been very, very complicated historically. Oh, one more thing. Collins has pointed out that there's a group of sea peoples, I forget what they called, but near Medan in North Sumatra, whose language is actually Kedah Malay dialect and hence similar to Urak Lawoit. It's got many of the same features about it, but of course then they're not called Malays. And it's known historically that Northwest Peninsula has long had connections with Northeast Sumatra and still continue to do so. The phonological shift of final nasals to final unvoiced stops, that actually has arisen in several different places. It's found regularly in Temiar. It's found in some upstream Malay dialects in Pahang. It's an easy one to produce, and it doesn't mean it's a common innovation, although the examples you've taken from Moken, I think, are indeed significant. And not Moken, Urak Lawoit are significant, like Malam going to Malap and so on. That actually happens fairly regularly in Austronesian languages. But of course, given the geography of what you've been talking about, it probably is a shared innovation in the languages you've just talked about. Anyway, I'll say more about some of this next week.
Thank you very much, both Jack and Jeff. I do appreciate, and I also share your ideas about the issues that you talked about. For example, the Nakhon Si Thammarat idea. I think for me, it's a hypothesis that can lead us to discover new things. But for me, I think it's not likely that the Moklen was from the eastern coast, from Nakhon Si Thammarat originally. The reason is if these Khmer looking words were really borrowed from Khmer, it must have been borrowed quite early on. But we see that the Moken and the Moklen only came into contact with the Thai very late in their history. So they probably wasn't in the area to be in contact with the old Khmer that early. So I do agree with Jack that they didn't originate, they didn't migrate from Nakhon Si Thammarat, but there might have been some interaction with the Thai from Nakhon Si Thammarat, or certain Thai population from Nakhon Si Thammarat intermarried into the Moklen community when they settled out in the coast. And I think that's something we don't know yet. Maybe we should pursue further. I also agree with Jeff that the similarities between Moklen and Chamic and Achanese are not a genetic one. I think the phonological innovations that people have proposed to be to be diagnostics for this genetic relationship are very common. They are very common in the area. So these languages could have got those similarities just by contact. So I totally agree with you about the Malay, the Moken and Cham not being very closely related. Thank you.
Next week, I will be suggesting there may be something on the East Coast hypothesis about Moken too. Of course, I'm not an expert on that particular population, but I think, well, to look forward to something I might suggest is I think the Moken-Mokling connection was both across the isthmus and possibly by sea around the peninsula, and that they maintain both connections, so which makes it even more complicated, in fact. And then whatever was left on the East Coast has since disappeared by assimilation to Thai or earlier Mon and Khmer speakers who I think were in that area too. And in fact, down into the peninsula as far south as Pahang, which I've written about elsewhere, at least as languages spoken by interloping traders or gold miners. So that only adds to the complication of this whole story, which isn't just about sea peoples, it links up with the land peoples in a complicated way as well.
Looking forward to your talk.
Right, thank you very much. So I will introduce the last speaker, who is myself. So it's perfect. I mean, my presentation quite locates well between this linguistic consideration, the more contemporary periods, and these plans of marine protected areas. And this general framework of segmentation and differentiation among into different, more or less nomadic Austronesian population. So I will take more ethnographic and localized perspective, and we'll talk about oppression and how Moken respond to different kind of oppressive forces. What are the strategies they develop in order to maintain their identity by focusing on the contemporary period. So like Joe already explained, is perfect. The founding myth of Gaman for the Moken narrates the trigger for the probable split of the Moken from the Austronesian migration, which is mostly slavery practiced by the different surrounding powers, and notably the Kingdom of Burma. So that first force was probably the precursor of a nomadic way of life that allowed the Moken to escape this kind of control in the insular maze of the Mieka archipelago. So now, how Jack already underlined, but also Dr. Wee earlier in this session, the environmental characteristics of the Mieka archipelago with its hundreds of islands probably gave the perfect environmental setup for a nomadic socio-cultural organization of the Moken, where, as Professor Wee underlined, nomadism is not a pointless wandering between the islands, but a web of mobilities based on interrelated territories, based on kinship ties, based on looking for resources, on the mobility of some specialists like the shaman or the harpooners, which make the Moken territory an all-connected one, even though there are different levels and subdivision in these different territories. Now, to linking the Moken to this territory is the Bolobung ceremony, which means making the spirit poles that you can see here on these pictures, which consists in fact once a year at the transition between the dry season and the southwest monsoon. The whole Moken subgroup gathering back on their mother island, mother island names from which they get the subgroup name as well. So the Niawi people gather on the Niawi island and so forth. And so each year they renew the contract with their ancestors by carving new poles that represent the founding ancestors. But of course, so we can see there is a very strong link between this ritual and the Moken territory in a Western geographic ways. But since it's not, there is no such separation in the Moken world, it also connects the Moken to the whole world of living and non-living beings, with the mountains where ancestors are believed to live as well, but also with undersea beings such as dolphins and whales, in which some individuals like shaman or rituals masters are believed to reincarnate. The thing is that when we look at the whole oral literature of the Moken, there is finally very little reference to this ceremony. The other thing is the Moken have been undergoing very drastic changes recently, with, for example, the disappearance of their very symbolic home boat, the kabang, and in some groups, together with the disappearance of this kabang, which was really the symbolism of nomadism for the Moken, we observed a kind of renewal in performing this Bolobung ceremony. Hence the question, how the changes in performing this ceremony can inform us on how Moken society adapts to different, more or less oppressive forces. And also to pick up on previous presentations by Cynthia Xu and Wenki Ariando, telling us that there are no such annual rituals in other nomadic Austronesian societies such as Sukulao or the Pajau. So where do the Moken situate themselves into this larger network of Austronesian populations? So to give few words of the contemporary period, of course, through the geopolitics of decolonization, the Moken territory has been divided, as we can see here, in Thai waters and islands and Myanmar waters and islands. And of course, this border has been quite artificial since there are still some cross-border mobility. Though each communities on each side of the border are impacted by different kind of state policies. The Miek archipelago from the Myanmar side has been long a borderland, and the border was really enforced starting in the 90s. This brings a lot of changes with quite systematic colonization of the islands by Burmese fishers in the center and south of the archipelago, by Karen farmers in the north, which led to the disappearance of the kabang, for which there are many different reasons that I won't go into detail now. And let's say a restructuring of mobility. So from there on, we can give an outline of a new oppression system that took roots in the archipelago. The earlier settlements, apart from the Moken in the archipelago, were probably in the north, in the island of Tung and Niamey, where Karen farmers settled. And together with the Karen, as already evoked earlier by Jacques, came the missionaries. which from the Moken perspective can be seen as a first pole of operation. And even if evangelization efforts towards the Moken largely failed, there is still one group who has been converted, calling themselves Moken Sidia, which seems to assert this new Christian identity. And through interaction with the Karen, including intermarriages, the Bolobung ceremony disappeared from these northern groups. Now in the south, in order to reinforce the border, were settled big military bases. The one has been based in the island of the Chadiak group, which is called Zadeji in Burmese. A smaller one, but still with permanent garrison, is present in Jelam, where also reside some Moken. Our trip in 2017 in Chadiak Island suggests that the Moken there were forced to abandon their boat, their traditional boat, the kabang. And the Bolobung ceremony, though it's still performed, take a very characteristic shape, where we can see the Lobung are contained in some ways into a boat shape structure, which is also observable in the connected island of Jelam, which tends to underline a process of deterritorializing this Lobung ceremony, making it something more disconnected from the spiritual forces of the territorial appropriation, which also comes together thanks to the military, to the presence of Buddhist monks trying to preach the Moken, though it's not really a success. This reading of new poles of operation provides a framework of possibilities for the expression of the Moken identity. In the north, as I said, the Bolobung ceremony has disappeared. In the south, it has been settled and kind of enclosed with the apparent aim to be turned into a folkloric event, rather than a process of connecting the whole Moken world. So how do these forces impact on Moken mobility, territory, and the perpetuation of their identity is one question we try to answer here. And to answer this, we will take a look at the more central Jade group, which used to be there. So the Jade group had very violent and direct encounters with state-backed development policy since the 50s. In 54, there have been some Japan investors to develop pearl farm together with the Myanmar government in the Jade group's mother island. 10 years later, in 64, the whole national economy was nationalized. So from there on, the military took the responsibility of the pearl farm and forced the Moken out of their mother island, while in the previous periods, they told us they were even able to work on the pearl farms under the Japanese. So from there on, they had to jump further north to what is known as Kocho Island in Moken. And in the 90s, they were again forced out of this island. This time their entire village burned to the ground. So they take very short refuge on Buza Island. But through the implementation of new pearl farms, they had to again move to what is now known as Lengan Island. At the same time, more or less, in further south, the bigger island of Lampi or Labi in Moken, which is a mother island of another group, was targeted to become a Moken ideal village by the authorities in order to regroup. They try to regroup all the Moken groups from the archipelago in this island. And although it's been again a failure because they could not enforce it and Moken groups fled again, part of the Jade group, whom mobility I just described here, stayed in this further south Lobby Island. So from there on, one of the strategy of resistance of the Moken, and here particularly for the Jade group, is of course the very long practice of mobility and dissimulation. The constant remaking of Moken subgroups is a way to keep flexibility and avoid control from the state. And from the main Moken subgroups evoked earlier and described by Jack Ivanov back in the 80s and 90s, there have been now several splits into very different and smaller groups. As Moken is an oral population with an oral tradition, of course, nothing is carved in marble, but everything is kept. And the Jade group history is a textbook case of such strategy. As overviewed earlier, the Jade subgroup was forced out its mother island almost 60 years ago. Since then, their history has been one of more or less coerced mobility. However, the Jade names remain, but even before being the Jade group, they probably came from another island. As I said, they extended down to the south to this Lobby Island and the center of Punala, where the authorities tried to gather all the Moken. And through that means, they also reflected this new territorialization through their Bolobung ceremony. So that now the Jade group performs every year a 3-day cycle, beginning in the island of Buza, where they used to live at some point, continuing with the island of Lengan, where a part of the group resides now, and ending with this Punala center in the south. Another way of resisting and maintaining their identity despite all these forces is to internalize oppression into symbolic ways. So, as you can see, this is from, I think, the year 2017 or something like this, but we have similar pictures for different years where the Moken spirit poles are clearly military shaped. Even Gacha, who is the shaman of the Jade group, sometimes adopts a military cap in order to assert his power, but also internalize the oppressive force, so that the ancestors can benefit from them. But it's not only symbolical, since, as I said, the Jade groups already worked with the Japanese and the military on pearl farms quite a long time ago. Gacha, the shaman, is believed to have, from our research, some agreements with Navy and military boats in the archipelago to allow them practicing their mobility and livelihood. So it's not only symbolical. Now, what's very interesting is that from this forced mobility and internalizing all these forces, the shaman Gacha became a very strong individual in the whole Moken communities who live in Myanmar. So that now the Lengan, because there is another Lengan group in Lengan, for this group, the shaman Gacha is totally necessary. The Bolobung ceremony for the Lengan group depends on the presence and the will of Gacha, much like does the lobby group in Punala, where they also profit from from the symbolic power of the shaman. Another thing is deterritorialization and re-territorialization. What's happening now in the archipelago, as I said, is a quite systematic colonization of the islands by the Burmese. And through this colonization, the Burmese themselves need to appropriate this new and quite strange territory, because they were formerly mostly farmers living in the hinterland. And in order to do that, apart from erecting pagodas and building monasteries, of course, they also actively try to compete with the Moken religious markers, which was the Lobung, by erecting some Buddhist statues, or putting some Buddhist monk pictures right next in the Lobung shrines, or very close to the location of the Lobung. So interestingly, the Jade group, in order to answer this kind of spiritual warfare, if I can say, borrow to the Burmese semiotic by building lobungs in concrete, which means building lasting lobungs, which become territorial markers for the group, which is a very different move from the process of renewing each year the lobung, the wooden lobung. So now, what happened is that they mostly change the paint, the decoration of the lobung each year during the Bolobung ceremony. And of course, this symbolic warfare is a direct effect of increasing competition on land and land-based resources. So for instance, there are increasing forces of exclusion towards the Moken through commodification of village land, for instance. The hinterland is increasingly used for plantations or logging, so that even wood for the lobung is become scarcer and scarcer. And this goes also, as explained by our colleague Kozolong, that goes also for the marine resources, which are become scarcer and scarcer. So, sorry, this is quite misplaced, but it's for you to have an idea of between the year 2000, where there were almost, only very few developments, to the situation now, where you can see the different pearl concessions, but also all the hotels that developed in the archipelago. This plus the colonization of the islands by Burmese fishers is putting a lot of pressure on Moken territory. But as Jack already described, the Moken strengths resides in their capacity to show adaptation on the one hand, and even we could say integration for the satisfaction of dominant stakeholders, the states, the Burmese sailors, while on the other side, they maintain their nomadic identity. This is what Jacques Ivanov calls the pivot strategy, which is a major feature of the Moken society, but also a possible commonality among Austronesian groups which migrated to this region. At the micro level, this pivot strategy can also be analyzed through the prism of the Lobung ceremony. So as far as the Jade Moken group is concerned, the Lobung transformation into permanent territorial markers cannot be dissociated from being time markers as well. And these time markers may well preside of a new kind of segmentations that can be revealed in discourses and narratives. So while the Jade shaman is very keen to say that Lobung will remain, but there'll be no more shaman to worship them, and that the younger generation will say, we don't dare to take on the shaman's role, it's too much responsibility. Another narrative seems to emerge, with Moken now talking of sea Moken, Moken-Oken, as opposed to less genuine freshwater Moken, Moken-On, when they try to comment on the rapid changes happening in their way of life. As far as another group is concerned, the Niawi group here in the south, the interdiction to go to their cemetery, which island has been auctioned to a resort. And the increasing presence of Burmese settlers, it led them to redefine their ritual territory as well. Though this territory remains much more confined than the Jait group, it's still on the main Niawi island. The Lobung ritual has been extended to the north part of the island in a similar segmentation or pivotal pattern, where the Moken constantly open new territories which are relatively freer from external interferences, while maintaining the link with an increasingly Burmanized part of the community which lives in the village. Of course, it's a short presentation and there are a lot of shortcuts in this, but such strategy resembles much the segmentation that probably happened between the Moken and the Moklen, who stayed on the groves of the Thai coast, and could explain the link between the different Austronesian groups of the eastern coast of the Andaman Sea. That is a littoral society extending through migratory leaps and segmentation that produced the different, though very interconnected nomadic group of the region. So as a conclusion, though migration to further and freer locations is increasingly unlikely due to the Burmese systematic colonization of the archipelago, we could imagine that the segmentation process will lead to part of the Moken living a quite settled lifestyle on the island, whom territorial markers, that are the Lobung, may blend into the overall territorialization or even nation-state building process of the archipelago, while another segment of the Moken will continue perpetuating a more nomadic lifestyle, resembling the one of the Orang Sukulaut or Bajau, without annual rituals, but with a more intimate and territorialized belief system perpetuated by the shamans. So that's it. Thank you very much. I don't know if there are any questions.
I would like to ask about the disappearance of the Moken boats. Has this been written up?
This has been the case throughout all the Moken groups from the north of the archipelago down to the south in Surin Island in Thailand. There are several reasons. I think the more relevant one is the change in lifestyle. So now Moken are mostly fishing for squids, at least in the central and southern part of the archipelago. And this means that they have to go back for ice quite regularly to the village. So since the Moken boats, with its symbolic of having a mouth that eats the sea and defecates almost directly, I mean, which is a parable of non-accumulation and nomadic way of life, the boat lost its meaning. This is one thing. After there have been, as I said, some more coercive forces, like the presence of the military, preventing them from doing these boats and forcing them to adopt more Burmese-style boats. There is also the scarcity in proper wood with which you can make the lobung. So it's yeah, it's a crossing of very many different factors.
Have you written this up? Could I, ask for?
Oh yeah. I mean, I did wrote some articles, some with Jacques as well. So yes, I mean, I could send you some literature.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Could I? Oh,
sorry.
Does someone else want to speak?
Yeah, I can't see who.
I think I'm getting feedback. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Could I ask about these statues? They're now in concrete and paint. I may have missed something at the beginning of your talk, but what were the prototypes like? Were they that size and they were made of wood, presumably?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, it's interesting because there are very different kind of lobung shape according to each Moken subgroup. So, for instance, in the Nyawi subgroup, you will find this kind of poles, which are less abstract, if you can say.
Yeah.
In other subgroups, you will have much more anthropomorphic style of lobung. But at the beginning, they are all made in wood, and there is this process which is very important of renewing these poles each year, where the former poles are not thrown out, of course, but they are kept in the back of the ceremonial site. And they quite well symbolize this transformation of the lobung, who are the ancestors, going further to the forest and the mountain, where the founding ancestors are believed to reside. So this is how traditionally the lobung ceremony works. And they're not, I mean, the concrete version of the lobung is for the moment is only in for the Jait group, so the one which is quite spread out into the middle of the archipelago, whilst in Nyawi and Jelam and Chadiak they're still in wood.
One interesting parallel is that southern Orang Asli, who happen to be the Austronesian speakers, they differ from the other Orang Asli in actually memorializing their graves, whereas the northern Orang Asli traditionally fled the site of a death and immediately set up a new village somewhere else. But in the south, groups like the Jakuns, and indeed some of the Aslian speakers who follow those patterns, like the Samalais, they have for quite some time now been using cement to make permanent graves when their family members die. And I think the same is also happening down in the Rio Islands as well. It might be interesting to check how long they've been able to obtain cement to do this kind of work.
Well, of course it came with the Burmese. I mean, the Burmese introduced the first cemented infrastructures in the archipelago. And we can observe more or less the same thing about graves. Normally, Moken have, I mean, they're coming back, and notably through this annual ritual. They're coming back each year to the cemetery. Normally, one lobung is put in the cemetery as well. But now this Jade group is also increasingly cementing their graves, which participates as well as a kind of more territorialization, I mean, putting the markers there.
Thank you.
Maxime?
Yeah.
I would like to ask a question to you and to Vivienne. Sorry for being so naive, but Vivienne, you said that the groups you were studying were forcibly converted. And so my question is, do those groups you analyze continue to to practice any traditional rituals like the Moken or anything like this, or are they completely Muslims?
Actually, the conversion is not exactly forcible, because I mean, how are you going to force? Because it's very easy to convert to Islam, because you just have to repeat the two declarations of faith: there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, in Arabic. So you just have to imitate the person saying that, and then lo and behold, you are Muslim. But Islam requires things like reading the Quran, and then if you are illiterate, how are we going to read the Quran? This is not possible. So there is a kind of a contestation between the conversion to Islam and then fear of the less Islamized as practicing black magic. So those Karas people, for example, who went and converted the Nanga people to Islam, they haven't visited since 1970. They haven't visited them because they are afraid. So the politics of black magic is very effective, because the people who see themselves as superior end up being so frightened, and they stay away.
Okay.
And similarly, the Moken, or I mean, as you know already, Vivienne, they can very easily take Buddha statue to put in their shrine, and transform it in a very strong ancestor or entity that belongs to their world. But they can very easily show that they are Buddhist to the Burmese by saying, look, we have the statue. And now in the north, where there have been more evangelization process, the Moken living in the north are feared by the others as also having kind of black magic and being powerful on this.
There's one thing I want to add, Fabian, which is that you see, we tend to think about adherence to a world religion as either or. You see, it's not either or. So in fact, I found that there is a continuum. So maybe people can't read the Quran, so then they say they don't eat pork, but there's not much pork anyway in the Riau Lingga archipelago, because they are oriented towards the sea. So there are degrees, you see. You can so you can say you don't eat pork. So that's quite easy to follow.
Thank you very much.
No.
All right. So it's on now the question, I think. It's already quite late. and the time to leave the discussion there. We'll have another session same time next week. So you're all welcome to connect and participate. A late welcome to Nicole, who joined the session anyway, and hope seeing you at the next one next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maxime.
Thank you.
Merci. À bientôt.